not next/router, by the way. That's for the old Next.js. The next/navigation is what we want for this. And then we can simply call the router.push. So we're going to push something into the URL, and that's going to be as a template string to /configure/design ? So as a query parameter, and the ID is going to be equal to, and then in dynamic syntax right here with this $sign, we're going to say the config ID. Right, so basically we're saying once the user is done uploading their image, we're going to push them to the next step and also pass the ID of the config for the image they just uploaded, right? So we can use the same image in the next step. The user doesn't have to do anything again. They don't have to upload the image again, right? That's why this is so cool. And now another really useful helper that we get from useUploadThing is the onUpload progress. There we go. And what this gives us is basically the P, it's a number, and this is the upload progress, right? So we can say set upload progress just to this P that we get from UploadThing. Thereby we set it as a state right up here, and we can now use this value to display our loading state, right? And that we're passing into our progress bar right here. That's where it comes from. Awesome. And now we're all ready to go to actually handle the onDrop accepted and onDrop rejected case. So what should happen if a drop is accepted? Well, basically we first need to accept the files. So the accepted files, and these are going to be a file array. And these accepted files are automatically passed into this function by React drop zone. And what we want to do with them is to basically upload them right away, right? So we can destructure the start upload function from our useUploadThing handler and now use it to upload all the files that were accepted. So how do we do that? We can say start upload. There we go. And this takes the accepted files, and it also takes the config ID that we need to pass in, because that's what we expect in the core.ts right here, because we specified it as an input, right? We need anything here. It can be optional, so we are totally fine to pass undefined, which we're also going to do, because passing in a string right here for the config ID will only be relevant later, not right now. So for now, we're going to leave this as undefined. And then we're also going to set isDrag over to false, because the user is no longer dragging over. Their image was successfully accepted, and so we can reset that state. All right, now what should happen on the onDrop rejected? What if the user dragged in a file that is not a PNG or JPEG? In that case, first off, we want to destructure that file from the array of rejected files that are automatically passed in here by React drop zone. And this is going to be of type file rejection array, a type that we have already imported at the very start when we started this file right up here, file rejection, there it is. And we can destructure one file from the rejected files. There we go. So this is going to be the first file that was rejected. In most cases, that's just going to be a single file that was rejected, right? So that is the file that was rejected. And we're also going to say isDrag over false, because in either way, right, if it was accepted or not, doesn't really matter. In any case, the dragging animation should be done, right? And lastly, what we're going to do, why we need this file, is we want to show a toast notification, an error notification to the user. And in order to do that, our UI library actually has something built in as well, that is the toast. Let me show you what this does. If we hit this button, you can see there's a little notification popping up right there. And that's exactly what we want to show the user, that this file type is not supported. They need to upload something else. And in order to do that, we can simply go ahead into our terminal. Let's clear this and say npx -cn-ui at latest, and then add toast and hit enter. That's going to install all we need to actually show beautiful toast notifications inside of our app. And the only thing this expects us to do is to somewhere in our app put something called the, can I show this to you? Yeah, right here, the toaster component. So for example, we can do that in our root layout. Right here, we can go below the main tag, for example, and put the toaster that we can now import from our custom UI right here into our component. And what that does is basically it allows us to render out the toasts. It handles all the logic basically to show the toasts, right? And now the question is, how do we actually show the toast after putting our toaster in the layout? And that will happen via, if we take a look at our UI library documentation, via the useToast hook. We can simply grab this useToast hook, paste it at the very top of our page right here. So const toast that we destructure from the use toast hook. And then we can head over to our, where is it? On drop rejected right here. Let's use the toast function that we just destructured from the hook. And this is going to get three things. So the first one is going to be the title. You know, that's what we can see right here in the example. That's scheduled catch up. In our case, that is going to be actually a template string. And in here, we're going to say the file.file.type. Type is not supported. Period. This right here, the file.file.type, is going to be the exact type that the user tried to upload. For example, a video or a GIF or anything that is not supported is going to be included in the error message, which is very user-friendly. As the description we can pass in here, we're going to say, please choose a PNG, JPEG, or JPEG, kind of same thing, you know, image instead. Period. And lastly, as the variant, this will be destructive to make it like a red tone to let the user know that, you know, hey, something is wrong here. That is not a supported file type. So just for an example, I'm going to try to drag in a PDF file that should give us beautiful application/PDF type is not supported. Very, very nice. And we can simply slide this toast away beautifully. Okay, and if I now try to upload a normal image of myself, then we shouldn't get a toast, but instead we should get the start upload function invoked. And whoa, okay, that worked really fast. We already got redirected. That's good. But currently we're mocking the is uploading state, right? So if I drag in this image, then the functionality actually already works, but we're still kind of mocking out the is uploading. So we can actually get rid of our mock because now we can get the actual is uploading state simply from our use upload thing. We get something called is uploading, and that's gonna handle all the logic that is attached to the upload process. So what we can now do is if I drag in an image, and actually let's reload the page to get the freshest version first, just to make sure that any recent changes do apply. Let's drag in the image, uploading, there we go. We're gonna see the progress bar fill up, hopefully. There it is, it filled up. So that means it's done uploading, and that's going to redirect us to the next step in the process. Super good, very, very good, because that means we implemented all the uploading successfully, it works. And we should also, fun fact, now be able to see that file in our upload thing dashboard. So if we go ahead into our, I already have a lot of apps here. Let's go into here, into my Case Cobra dev, or your project for Case Cobra, into files, and then we should be able to see right here, beautiful, that the files are here uploaded. It says the date when we uploaded them, the size of the file, and the route in which this happened, the status, and we could also delete them if we wanted to, but we're not gonna do that. Beautiful, very, very good work on the uploading. Now what's missing is the steps on top, right? In the demo, if you remember, there was like step 1, step 2, step 3, like upload your image and configure your phone and then review it, right? That's super important for user guidance. Users always need to know what the next step is and where they currently are. And that's gonna happen inside of a separate component that we are going to create. And that component is going to live in our components folder, of course, right? Let's create a new file in here called steps.tsx, and that is gonna make our site look so much nicer. And the cool thing is all of the artwork to make the steps looks extremely nice is already prepared for you by the freelancer that I hired for this project. Let's declare a const steps, and this is gonna be, of course, once again an arrow function that we export default at the very bottom. There we go. And we can simply return a div at the top level for now from these steps. Now, where are we going to use these steps? Let's already import them where we need them. And that's going to happen in our layout for the configuration route. So this is not going to be the global layout, but the one that is specific to the folder that we're specifying all the steps in, right? This is where these steps are going to live, and they're going to live right here in our max with wrapper, right above the children. Let's import the steps component already. There we go. Of course, right now it won't do much, right? It's an empty div, so we won't see it show up on the page, but that's exactly what we're gonna do right now. So conceptually, how are these steps going to work, and why are we also defining them as a separate component? The answer is because we're gonna mark them as a use client component. Why are we going to mark them? Because we need access to one React hook, or rather Next.js hook. It's Next.js specific. And that is going to be, let's say const path name is going to be equal to use path name. And what this hook allows us to do is to get the current URL where we currently are. And based on that URL, we can then know which step we are currently on, because the step is actually defined in the URL, right? So the upload would be the first step. But our component doesn't just know that. It doesn't know that the upload is the first step. We need to tell it. And we're going to do that inside of a const steps, which is going to be an array. And we're going to define it above our actual component in all caps lock, because that's a convention for defining constants that I used at my previous dev job that we use now. It's just a very widespread thing to see that stuff that is defined as constant is in all uppercase. So when you're working in the code and don't see that on the top, you always know that this is a constant value. It doesn't change. It's not based on any API response or so. It's just a really good practice to do. All right, in here, we're going to create an object, and each object is going to have a name property. First one is going to be step 1 add image. So this is going to be the actual text that the user is going to see. The description is going to be choose an image for your case. And then last thing is going to be the URL. This is going to live under /upload. So that's how our component knows which step we are currently in, right? Let's mark this entire object, hit Shift Alt arrow down, bam, and let's do that twice. So we have 3 steps in total. Step 2 is going to be customize design, and the description for this is going to be make the case yours, and the URL is going to be /design. And then lastly, step 3 is going to be summary, and the description for this is going to be review your final design. And then the last thing we're going to specify here is the upload, or the URL rather, which is not going to be /upload, but it's going to be /preview. Right, so this is going to live under the /preview URL. And that's all the work we need to do for this component to know which step we are currently on in combination with the use path name hook. So at the top level, we're actually not going to return a div. That was just so we can already import the component in our layout. We're actually going to return a ordered list, an OL, because, well, this is ordered, right? It's step 1, 2, and 3. So this is the perfect use case for an ordered list. And the class name for this is going to be rounded-md, a BG of white, on large a flex, there we go, on large a rounded-none, on large devices a border-L, on large devices a border-R for right, and on large devices a border gray of 200. There we go. Let's open up this ordered list, and inside of here we're going to map over every step. So we're going to say steps.map, and for each step and also the index that we get access to in the callback function right here, we're going to execute a function first. So we're not directly going to return some JSX. That is going to happen down here with an li element at the top level, but first we want to handle some logic, and that logic will be is the current step that we're on, is it already completed? Is it the current step, or is it an upcoming step? And we can do that because we always know which step we are currently on. So for example, right, are we on the current step? Const is current is going to be equal to path name dot ends with the step.url. There we go, right? So if the current URL ends with upload, then we are currently on the upload step. I think that intuitively makes sense, right? And const is completed. Is the step already done? Basically, we can say steps.slice from I plus 1, and then we are gonna do a check for any step. So we're gonna say .sum, which basically goes through the entire array and checks if a condition is true for any element in the array, right? So we're gonna say step, and we're gonna return the path name dot ends with step.url, just like this. Let's format this, give it a bit more space. So what are we doing here? What's the logic? So basically we have step 1, we have step 2, and we have step 3, right? Let's zoom in a lot here. There we go. And if we are currently mapping over step 1, right? Imagine that case. Then how do we know if the step is already completed or not? So basically we're checking for the next steps, and let's get rid of the background. There we go. So in our case, the next steps right here would be 2 or 3. If we're taking the first step as a reference point for this logic, then we're checking for the step 2 and 3. Are they the current step? So if step 2 if the URL ends with step 2, right, which would be /design. In that case, we know we are already done with step 1 because we're already at the design stage, right? So in that case, we're going to return true because we're checking for any array element if this condition applies. And if it does, then the current step is completed. I hope that makes sense. I think it does. It's pretty straightforward logic here. And then last thing we want to do is define the img path, the image path, and that's going to be the image for this current step. This is going to be a template string, and then here we're going to say /snake minus, and then dynamically the i+1 dot png, and that should be i+1, not i+0, because arrays in JavaScript are 0 based and the images are 1, 2, 3. We're just going to add 1 right here, and that's going to be the path for the image that we want to use for the li element. And now the li is going to get a key because we're mapping over something. It needs that. That's going to be the step.name. It needs to be unique. And also it's going to get a class name. And this class name is going to be relative, overflow dash hidden, and lastly on large, a flex dash 1. Let's open this up. In here is going to live a div element at the top level, but no class name. And inside of here, a span element. This span will get a class name, and that's going to be dynamic. We're going to use our cn helper function in here. And by default, we're going to pass absolute, a left of 0, a top of 0, a height of full, a width of 1, background zinc 400, large bottom 0, on large a top dash auto, on large a height of 1, and on large a width of full. There we go. Now, what's the conditional part in here? Well, that's going to be the second thing we're going to pass into the cn function. First one is going to be, we're going to apply a bgzinc of 700 if this is the current step, if is current. And then in the other case, we're going to apply a bg primary if is completed, if the step is already done. And this div is actually going to be self-closing. There we go. And now as an accessibility best practice, I want to show you, because this div, or the span rather, is purely decorational, we're also going to say area-hidden is going to be true. We're just going to hide it for people that are on screen readers, right? Because if you don't see it, then it's not very important if it's just visual, just as a kind of accessibility and best practice that I want to show you. Below that, let's put a span element, and this is going to get a class name that is also going to be dynamic. We're going to use our cn helper function, and the first thing we're going to check in here is if the the current index of the step, is not equal to 0. In that case, we're going to apply a large padding left 9, and in the other case, we're not going to apply anything. And then as the default class name, we're going to apply flex items-center, a padding x of 6, a padding y of 4, a text-sm, and a font-medium at last. Awesome. Let's open up this span element, and inside of here, we're going to create, one more span element. There we go, with a class name of flex shrink of 0, and inside of the span is going to live a self-closing image tag. This image is going to get a source, which is going to be the img path that we determined at the very top already. All the work is done. And it's also going to get a class name. And this is going to be dynamic as well. So we're going to make use of our cn helper function. We're going to say flex, a height of 20, width of 20, object-contain, items-center, and justify-center as well. And as for the dynamic part, we're gonna apply a border-none if is completed, and we're gonna apply a border zinc of 700 if is current. So if that is the current step that we are on. Right after the closing of the image and one closing span, that's where we're going to open up. So with one closing span to go, after that the closing div. This is where we're going to create one more span element with a class name. That's going to be margin left 4, a height of full, margin top 0.5, a flex, minimum width of 0, flex-call, and justify-center. Let's open up this div, and inside of here lives one more span element. Let's open up the span. That's what I mean. And inside of here is going to live one more span element with a class name. And this will be a dynamic class name as well. So in our cn helper function as the default, let's apply a text of small, a font-semi-bold, and a text zinc of 700. And then as for the dynamic part, we're going to apply a text dash primary if is completed, and a text zinc of 700 if is current, if that is the step we are on. And inside of the span, we're simply going to display the step.name that we are currently on. Beautiful. So after the name, right here is going to be one more span element. I think that's the last one in this entire component. And this one is going to get a class name of text small and a text zinc of 500. And inside of the span, we're simply going to display the step.description. There we go. Beautiful. We can already save that, see what it looks like, and hopefully we're going to see all the steps show up here on our right side. If the development server is still running. Oh, there we are. Hell yeah, that looks awesome. We have all the images, the steps, the description. That looks nice. One thing that's missing is the separator, right? So with one closing span, two closing spans, three closing spans, that's where we're going to open up. So right before the closing div. And just as a note for us, we can even say something like separator here, just so it's easier for us to visually see what's happening in our JSX, right? And what we're going to do here is first off a check. If the I is not equal to 0, in that case, we're going to render out some JSX. And in the other case, we're going to render out null. And the actual JSX that we do want to render out is going to be a div element. So what is this for? Essentially, all this means is that this separator will only apply between step 1 and 2 and between step 2 and 3, but not before step 1, right? There should be no separator before this step. That doesn't make sense. The separator should be here and should be here, but not left of step 1. And that's all we're doing with this I is not equal to 0 check. So this div is going to get a class name that's going to be absolute inset 0, a hidden, a width of 3, and last a large block. Now, if we open this div up, that's where the separator element is going to live. But once again, since it doesn't make sense to write out SVGs ourselves, you're not going to learn anything from that. I prepared that all in a copy paste list for you. It's a very simple SVG. We can simply grab that as the separator, second item in the copy paste list, grab it, paste it in here, format our file, hit save. Let's move the copy paste list out of the screen again. And then let's see what it looks like. Let's reload the page and we can see, nice. There's a beautiful separator now between each individual step. So step 1, step 2, beautifully illustrated by the illustrator. By the way, I really like the images they have prepared. That looks beautiful. Step 1, step 2, step 3 with separators in between. So the user always knows where they currently are. They never get lost. And I just think it really adds to a good user experience. We got the upload functionality working. So right now, if we try to upload any kind of image, like for example, if I just try to upload this random image from my file system, that's gonna work. We also handled the case where images are, or where non-images are rejected, right? Where we show the toast notification, the uploading works, and now we are successfully redirected to the next step in the user journey of defining our case. And that's going to be probably the most interesting part of this entire build, the next step. But very, very nice. We got everything working. I'm really happy with the progress we're making, and you're doing a great job following along. I really mean that. You know, it's not easy building an application of this size, but that's what I'm here for. I want to teach you every step of the way how to do it. And very, very nice. Good job. All right, and with that done, we're about to hop into the coolest part. I mean, all of them are cool, but one of the most elaborate parts of this whole build, and that is step 2, because step 2 actually involves the database, the server-side rendering, the server-side logic, and so on. And let's see what that looks like, because I want you to understand this architecturally. So basically, we have step 1, then we have step 2. Let's quickly sketch that out here. We have step 1, we have step 2, and there we go. Let's change that, and then lastly, we're going to have, well, you can probably imagine step 3, right? How are these steps going to communicate with each other? And you've already seen a very basic introduction to that. So what happens when we upload an image here, right? We attach the image ID to the URL, and that is then forwarded to the second step, right? And the second step is going to be the phone case configurator. So there's going to be, like, if you imagine this is the screen that you're going to have on step 2, right? Then the phone case is going to be here on the left hand side. You can, kind of in the middle left hand side right here, where you can like drag over your custom image and stuff, right? And then on the right hand side we have options like the finish, the material, and so on. But how do we get access to that image in step 2? Well, basically we already have it in the URL, right? That's how we're basically passing it from step 1 to step 2. That's by putting it as the question mark ID is equals to the image ID that we just did when forwarding the user, right? So when we forward the user, when we push this into the router, well, the image ID, the config ID is already going to be there, but it is not linked to any database entry yet. So when we try to retrieve that ID in step 2, well, from where do we want to retrieve it? Where's the image stored? Well, technically it's stored in our cloud storage, right? But that's not really the best way of going about things. We need a database sooner or later. It's going to be super important for this entire thing to work smoothly, right? And when you land in step 2 for the image to already be there, to not be needed to upload again and so on, basically database super important for that. And that's how it works architecturally, right? We pass over the ID from step 1 to step 2, and then in step 2 we can make a request to our database with that or containing that ID, right? We make a request to, or let's make it a circle, DB, right up here. The database is going to fetch the image URL and give us back the image URL right here that we can now use in step 2 to overlay on the phone. So honestly, that's the secret, right? That's how this works architecturally. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. And the first step we need to do in order to get here, right, is to actually create a database and use it in our app. So where's the first place that we want to use our database? Basically, it's going to be in our core.ts file. So that's under upload thing core.ts. What should happen once the upload is complete? Well, basically, we need to store this image and the URL, right, that is passed to us from upload thing, from our cloud storage. We need to store that as the configuration in the database. And in order to be able to do that, we are going to use a Postgres database hosted by neon.tech. Now, this is not sponsored. I'm just gonna log in with GitHub here. Again, this is not sponsored. I like Neon, they're pretty good. The only downside is that you can only have one database on the free tier, and I am on the free tier. But hey, at least no credit card needed. But since I already have a database, I'm gonna need to delete that, and there we go. Now we can start a new database right here in Neon together. So, by the way, if you missed the URL, that's neon.tech, and that is going to be the database we're going to use in this app. Now, originally, I would have honestly used PlanetScale instead. That's what I always did, planetscale.com, but they recently removed their free tier, so I can't use it, right? You have to have a credit card in there now and pay like $30 a month for their database, and that's just not an option for a video like this. Even for my personal projects, that's often just way too expensive. So I think this is a good use case for the free tier on Neon. So the project name, let's name it Case Cobra. The Postgres version 16 is good. Let's name the database Case Cobra as well. There we go. And then as the region, I'm going to choose Europe, Frankfurt, and you can choose whatever is closest to you. Or if you plan to deploy this, whatever is closest to the users where they will be, what you expect. Okay, and great, that's already going to give us the connection string. We can simply grab this or just hit the copy button here at the bottom right, close out of this, and then paste that connection string into our .env file, right? So this is gonna be the database underscore URL is going to be equal to the string we just got. Now, why database URL? Well, because that's a format that Prisma, the ORM we're gonna use, expects. So let's open up a new terminal, and in here we're going to install the ORM we're going to use to interact with our database. So we're going to say pnpm install Prisma and also add Prisma/client. The Prisma client is going to generate TypeScript types for us. We're just going to make working with Prisma here locally very, very enjoyable because it's going to be fully type safe, which is really cool. And once that's installed, we can just initialize it. Great, that's done. And once that's installed, we can say npx prisma init and hit enter. That's going to create a Prisma database file for us. Right here, it created a new folder, that command we just executed. By the way, let's clear the terminal just so it looks better. And that created a new schema.prisma right here. And by the way, we can also already open our app up side by side just so we have something nice to look at while we do this. Let's drag this over. There we go. Okay, that looks a lot nicer. Okay, so inside of this Prisma file, we can get rid of all the comments. We don't need that. And basically the idea is that we can define our data models inside of this file and then use them across our app to kind of write data into our database or get data from our database. And the way we're going to do that is going to be inside of a new DB folder right here that we're going to create in our source folder. And in here, let's create a new index.ts, because the question is, when we are inside of a file where we want to fetch some server-side data, right? So for example, before we write anything in the index here, I want to show you why we do this, right? So let's go into our configure folder, and in here, we're going to create a new folder, and that's going to be the design folder. So this is going to be the second step of our user flow. And once again, inside of the folder lives a page.tsx, just a naming convention that we kind of need to follow. Now in here, let's create a const page, which is going to be an arrow function, and let's export default page at the very bottom. Now, what happens by default is that we can actually mark this component as an asynchronous function. Why can we do that? Because this entire thing by default is a server-side component. It runs on the server and only the HTML is then sent back to the client, which means if we make DB call, if we make a database call here, that's totally valid to do. That doesn't happen on the client, it happens on the server, and only the result that we can then include in the JSX is then sent back as static HTML. And here's the thing, in order to make that call, we need a database client, right? We need a way to access our database. And that's exactly what's happening in the DB index.ts. That's what we made it for. So in here, we're going to say declare global. So we're overwriting the global TypeScript scope, and we're going to say var cached Prisma is going to be of type Prisma client. Now this type Prisma client, we can import that, import at the very top, Prisma client from, and then add Prisma / and we should get autocomplete here, client. There we go. By the way, I'm going to give this, we can just close out of this. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to say let Prisma. This will be of type Prisma client. And the goal of what we're doing right here is, you can probably tell from the naming we gave the cache Prisma, well, we're caching the Prisma database client. If we already initialize the client once, there's no need to do it again. Right, there's no point creating multiple connections to our database if we already have one. And that's going to be some very straightforward logic. So for example, if the process.env.node_env is triple equal to, and we get some type safety here because that is a built-in environment variable that any Node.js runtime will give us. If we are in production, in that case, we're going to say Prisma is equal to a new Prisma client, right? We're just going to call that. In the other case, else, we're going to say, well, we're going to do a check, right? If we don't have a cache Prisma, we need to create one client. But once we have that client and this file is executed again, well, we already have the client to send back. So if there is no global dot, and now we get some type safety here, cached Prisma, there we go, then we're actually going to create a new Prisma client for once, right? That's fine. The global dot cached Prisma is going to be equal to a new Prisma client. However, in the other case, we already, global, there we go. However, in the other case, where we already have created a Prisma client, in that case, we can just say Prisma is equal to global.cached Prisma. There we go. Okay, and now all we need to do is say export const db is equal to Prisma at the very bottom. Once you write this file once, no matter how many projects you do, this one, any other project, you can always just copy and paste this file. As easy as that, you write it once and then you never worry about it again. We're never gonna touch this file again. We do this logic once just to prevent making too many clients, but that's kind of it, right? Technically, you don't even have to do this, right? You could always invoke a new Prisma client if you want to, but really there's no need to, and I want to show you that and how to kind of do it a bit better. Right? That's just important for me that you know how it works well. And if you want to break that rule and always just invoke a new Prisma client, well, you can, right? Technically, we could leave all of it away. Yeah, you can, but I want to teach you how to do it the proper way, right? And that's it. We're already done in our index.ts. Bam, we can close out of that. And let's see what the first thing we need to put into our database will be. So what are we actually passing here? Well, technically it's an image, right? And what characterizes an image? Well, what's very important that we need to keep track of when a user imports the image? First off, probably the most important is the URL. Where is this image hosted? It needs to be hosted somewhere in order for us to then display it in step 2, right? What's the other thing? The aspect ratio. We can have the URL of the image, but if we don't know the ratio of how to display it, it's going to look super weird in step 2, right? It's going to be completely off. Therefore, we need the height of the image, and we also need the width of the image. And of course, from that goes the aspect ratio, right? If we have the height and the width, that's all good. And one thing we can already do while we are here, we're not gonna need it immediately, but for later, and it's also related to the image, is we're gonna need to keep track of the cropped image URL, right? Why do we need to do that? Well, basically in step 2, the user can drag the image. So imagine, I mean, there's a lot of boxes now. I'm gonna make this green. Just imagine this is the image, right? We can drag this image however we want over the phone, as you saw in the demo in the very beginning, right? And then this image will be cropped. So the left and right side will actually be gone in this case, or now the bottom. They're not overlaying the phone, so we don't need them. We only care about exactly this part, overlaying the actual phone, right? The entire rest on the left and right and bottom here, we don't care about them, and we need to keep track of how the image is cropped to then in step 3 display the actual preview, how exactly the user configured it. It needs to be the exact same thing, and that's how we keep track of the cropped image URL. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We can already get started, inside of our schema.prisma, and that lives in the Prisma folder right here, and get started in doing a very basic modeling of this. So now we're gonna get started with database modeling, okay? So we're gonna say model configuration, and that's gonna be the most important model in the entire app, because that's gonna contain all the things we just talked about. So each configuration will have an ID, which is going to be a string. And in Prisma, we can say add ID, and we can also give it a default ID, which in our case will be a collision resistant unique identifier. We could also use a UUID, but they are longer and they take up more space. Then we're going to keep track of the width, as we talked about, as an integer. It's just a number. The height, same thing, is going to be an integer. And lastly, the cropped image URL will be also a string, but we're gonna make it optional. Why? Because in step 1, we're already going to create a configuration, but we don't have this yet because the user has not yet completed step 2, right? In step 2, we get the cropped image URL. In step 1, we don't. So what we're gonna do is create the configuration in step 1 and then later update it. Just this kind of thing we're gonna update in step 2. Right? So we can already save this, the schema.prisma, and now to push those changes into our database, to sync them with our remote database, we're gonna say npx prisma db push. Bam. We don't need to generate any kind of SQL migrations here. Now, if you're going into production, eventually that might be a good idea, but this is the fastest way to get your schema into your remote database, so the remote database actually creates the tables that we need, right? And if we refresh this, then we should be able to see, if we go to like overview somewhere, well, I don't know where it is right now, maybe here under tables. Yeah, there we are. It created the table in our remote database called configuration. So exactly what we have right here in our schema, in our Prisma schema. Perfect. That's very, very nice. And now the first step is to actually create the configuration in step 1 along with our image URL, right? That we can then pass as the ID to step 2 to refetch the image there, which is perfect for user experience because they don't need to upload anything again, right? And that's gonna happen inside of our core.ts TS on the onUpload complete. This is a server-side function that runs whenever the image upload was successful. So the image is now stored in upload thing. Now what should happen, right? That's the question. And what should happen is that we store these values right here we just talked about. So what we're gonna do to get the height and the width is, first off, we need to make a fetch request. Const res is equal to await fetch, and we're gonna make a request to the file.url. Right? Because essentially we need to grab the image and then see how high is it and how wide is it. And we need to do that inside of a buffer. Const buffer is going to be equal to await. And now we're going to use a library in order to do that. One of the most popular image processing libraries, and that one is called, let me show you, is called Sharp. I think it has a ton of installs. It's used basically everywhere. It's a high performance, wait, let's read that. A high performance Node.js image processing kind of package. The fastest module to resize, but it does a lot more than just resize. It got like 5 million installs. Yeah, it's doing pretty well. That's awesome. And we are going to install that right now to see how wide and how high the image is. So inside of our terminal, let's clear that. Let's say npm install sharp, and we're going to install specifically the version 0.32.6. Why? Because there was a incompatibility introduced between Sharp and Next.js. It doesn't comply very well, and this version doesn't have the incompatibility. It works just as we expect. So we're able to grab the width and the height. Okay, and now inside here, const buffer is equal to await, and we're basically going to call Sharp that we just installed, right? And that is gonna come at the very top of the file from import Sharp from Sharp. As a default kind of import, not a named one, and now we can simply call Sharp and pass it the buffer. And no, I messed that up. The buffer is not going to be await Sharp. The buffer is just going to be await res.array buffer, which is a function we can call on here. That's the first thing we need to do. Let's do everything in order here. So we fetch the image, we convert it to a buffer, and now we can actually grab the image metadata. So let's say const image metadata is going to be equal to, and now we're going to say await Sharp and pass in the buffer because it takes the buffer right here, right? We could provide it some options if we want to. We don't need to. There's simply a metadata function that we can now call that's going to give us the width and the height that we can now simply destructure. Const width height is equal to image metadata. What else is there? We can see, let's see, chroma, subsampling, background, channels, compression, delay, density, a lot of stuff. You get the idea, right? We don't care about all of that. We only care about the width and the height, so we can correctly display this image in step 2 with the correct aspect ratio, right? That's all we need. Now, if there is no config ID passed into this route, which there will not be, by the way, because if you remember, if we go to our upload page right here, what we're basically saying is the config ID is undefined. We are going to pass it in step 2, but not in step 1, the upload step, right? Therefore, the config ID will be undefined, which means that there is no config and we need to create one in our database. Later, we're going to update the existing one, remember, with the cropped image URL, but not in step 1. In step 1, we still need to create it. It doesn't exist yet. So we're going to say const configuration is going to be equal to await, and now we're going to make use of our DB, or actual database client that we can now use to interact with our database. And this is fully type safe, by the way, because it's Prisma, which is great. We can say db.configuration.create, and inside of here this takes an object. So this takes the data property whenever we want to create something, and it will ask us for all the data that it needs, which is the height and the width. Oh, and I think we forgot one thing, which is the image URL. Yeah, we actually forgot that. Of course, when the image is uploaded, we also want to store the URL for it, right? That's literally the first aspect that we forgot here. So the image URL is going to be a string, and it's not going to be optional. We always want this string. All right, once again, npx prisma db push. Whenever we make changes in our schema.prisma to let our remote database know that we changed something in this file, because otherwise it just wouldn't know. This is a local file, right? We need to execute npx prisma db push to to push that into our database. That's gonna refresh our TypeScript, and now we know that we also need to pass the image URL, right? So the image URL in this case is just going to be the file.url that we get back in this function. The height is going to be either the height, or let's default this to 500, because this height could be undefined if the metadata is not contained in the image, right? If Sharp cannot get it. However, that doesn't really happen. Just for TypeScript to be happy, it needs to know that this is a number though. And same thing for the width. This is either going to be the width, or we're gonna say 500 to make TypeScript happy. Beautiful. Okay, and we can now simply return this, and we're gonna say config ID is gonna be the configuration.id, right? So basically we are returning, if you remember back to the client, right, the actual database configuration ID. So that's gonna be the one that we actually get back right here, right, from the data. That's gonna be sent to the client-side hook that we can use. And in the other case where there is already a config ID, in that case, if you remember, we just want to update this. We are already going to be in step 2 at this point because step 1 already created the config. So let's update the existing config. Const updated configuration is going to be await db.configuration.update. And in here, we're going to pass an object where basically, whenever we update something, we need to tell Prisma what is the entry you want to update. And that goes by anything that's unique. In our case, that is the ID of the config. That's going to be our config ID that is passed into this function automatically. And then the data we want to update this with is going to be the cropped image URL, right? As I told you about earlier, which is just going to be the file.url. Beautiful, which means when in step 2, the cropped image URL will be uploaded. In that case, that will be the file.url. So the file.url will actually be 2 different things in 2 different scenarios. In step 1, the file.url will be the uncropped image that the user literally just uploads in step 1, right? That's just the user image, not cropped, not anything. That's going to be the file.url. And if the user actually drags around the image right here in step 2, as I showed you earlier, and then crops it by clicking the continue button, we're automatically going to upload that. And then that's going to be the file.url we're going to save as the cropped image URL, right? You're going to see exactly what this looks like later. So basically, we're storing the actual user image that they uploaded uncropped, and we're also for step 2 storing the cropped image. I hope that's clear. All right, and with the updated configuration done, we can simply now return that back to the client. We're going to say return config ID, and that's going to be the updated configuration.id. There we go. Let's format this. Very nice. And now we can get rid of the redundant return statement at the very end, because in every case we are already returning a config ID, so we don't need that anymore. And then hit save. Beautiful. That's literally all we need to do for architecturally this right here to work. In step 1, we're storing the image along with the ID in the database, so that in step 2, we can now retrieve the exact image that the user uploaded based on the ID parameter, because now that will be stored in our database, which is great, right? So let's go into our design page and make that happen to actually see if it works, right? So instead of the comment we have here, make DB call, well, let's actually make the DB call. And step 1, in order for that to happen, is to actually get the ID that was passed from the URL, right? How do we get access to this ID parameter? And that's actually pretty simple. In Next.js, a page automatically receives some properties, which are the search params. And let's type these out. Let's say these are of type page props, which is an interface we're going to define right up here, interface page props. And this takes the search params, and this is a type basically provided by Next.js that we can just kind of type out ourselves, but they will automatically be passed in, right? For example, containing the ID property right here. And they're going to be of type in angled brackets key string. So the key, in our case ID, will always be a string, and that will map to either a string or a string array or undefined, right? If a parameter is not passed, it's going to be undefined. If it's passed, it's either going to be string or a string array. And to get access to the ID, because we know this is called ID, we can simply destructure the ID from the search params. And let's already see if this works. So we're just going to put the ID right here, save that, and then let's see what happens. So Let me open up my browser here and upload any kind of image. Let's upload just one that I prepared for Upstash like a while back. Let's upload that. And then let's let it upload. And then we should be forwarded with the ID parameter and actually see it on our page, right? And if we do, then we know that we received the parameter in a correct way. And why is this taking so long, by the way? Is the dev server... Oh, wait, there's an error. What's the problem? Let's see. Let's investigate this together. Why is that a long error? Cannot find module sharp. Okay, yeah, sometimes something is wrong with sharp. I think that is a version inconsistency. So the error is happening right here in our core.ts. It's complaining that it can't find the module sharp. So let me go ahead and fix that, because of course that works just fine in my demo. Let me see what's the difference and why it can't find the sharp module. All right, and I think I fixed the issue. Uploading is complete. Successfully simulated callback for file. Okay, that looks promising. And now it should redirect us. And my PC is 7 years old, by the way, so it's gonna take my PC very long, but that looks good. Redirecting and perfect. There is the ID. So this is the next page. This is the layout. Remember, it will always be visible. Perfect. Okay, that's exactly what we want. So the issue is probably just restarting your server, right? That's what I did. But also what I did is add like a little caret here in front of sharp, which lets the package manager know that we want to install the newest version. So just put that little caret in front of the number 0.32.6 and then say pnpm or npm install again. That's literally all I did. So put that caret, say pnpm install. That's gonna upgrade or update all the dependencies and see if we are up to date. And then very important, make sure to restart your server. Sometimes that just fixes issues. I think that was actually the problem and not really the caret here. But in any case, very nice. It works now. So we know we are correctly fetching the ID, right? The configuration identifier on our page, which means now because the image URL is in the database, we can see that actually by going into our terminal and saying npx prisma, there we go, studio. Let's hit enter here. And we can actually take a look into our database, and that's going to open that up in Chrome, but I want to open it up right here. There we go. We can see our configuration. And if we give this a bit more space, we can see our actual database and the image URL that is put in here, which is the actual user image URL uncropped. If we take that and paste it, bam, there it is, the image I just uploaded. Very nice. And we also have the width and the height of the image. Perfect, because now that is the aspect ratio of the image, how we want to display it in step 2, right? Perfect. So that's working exactly as expected. Very, very nice. And we now have the ID to work with on the next page, right? So we can close out of a lot of these files. And because we now know that we have the correct ID, we can now do a check. If we don't have the ID for any reason, if it's not passed to this page, so if anyone directly navigates to this page for any reason, it doesn't make sense, but let's check for that. Or if the type of ID is not equal to a string, in that case, there is nothing to display, right? We need an ID for this page to work. Anything else doesn't make sense. So in that case, let's return not found. This is a function we get from next/navigation. And basically what's going to happen is it's going to throw a 404 error if the design ID is not there, right? So if I crop that out or cut it out, whatever you want to call it, and then paste that, now this check will be true and it's going to throw a 404 because we don't know what to display in that case, right? That doesn't make sense, but if the user follows the right steps, right, as we intend, then the ID will always be there, of course, and they're not going to get a 404. Now, let's actually get access to the configuration, right, to show the image. The configuration is going to be equal to await db, let's import our database in here, .configuration .find unique, because there will only be one configuration with this ID, right? It's going to be unique. So we're going to say where ID. So basically we're telling Prisma find the configuration with the ID of whatever we passed into the URL as a query parameter, in our case this, and give it back to us, right? And if we don't have the configuration, if nothing was found with this specific ID, in that case, of course, we're going to return not found as well. So in that case, the ID parameter is there, but it doesn't match any entry in our database. Lastly, we know there is a valid configuration and a valid ID, which means we can simply destructure something from the configuration. And that's going to be the image URL. We're going to destructure the width and also lastly the height. And now the actual core logic for this component involves a lot of client-side logic, right? Where the user is able to drag around the image on the phone, right? That's going to be purely client-side. That doesn't happen server-side. It doesn't make sense. It needs React hooks and all that. So we can't really do it inside a server-side component. Therefore, what we need to do is to create a new component, and that one is going to be client-side. And we're going to call it the design configurator, because, well, that's exactly what it is. And this component, we can simply go to our file tree and create it in the same folder, the design folder. It's not going to be a reusable component because we don't need it to be reusable. So it's totally cool, or I think it's even better to create it right where you need it instead of in our components folder. So inside of here, we're going to create the design, let's spell that right, design configurator.tsx. There we go. Let's create that. And this, as always, is just going to be a basic arrow function. Const design configurator is going to be an arrow function. And I need to switch keyboards. There we go. And fix that syntax error. Okay, and we can export default design. And I said configuration again. This needs to be configurator. I hate to spell this word, configurator. It's, I don't know, it's just a hard word to spell. Let's just copy and paste it down to export it as the default. And now, because we know what we need to pass into this configurator to correctly display the user image, in step 2, let's also receive that in the design configurator as properties, right? So we get access to it right away. So let's destructure the config ID. Let's also destructure the image URL and the image dimensions. And let's say these will be of type design configurator props. There we go. And that's the type we can define at the very top right here, interface. And because I hate spelling this word so much, I'm going to copy and paste it. There we go. And that allows us to now define and tell TypeScript what this will receive, which are, of course, these three right here, right? So first one is going to be the config ID, which is, of course, going to be a string. The image URL will also be a string. And lastly, the image dimensions are going to be an object, of course, consisting of the width as a number, and also the height as a number, so we can correctly display the image to the user. And I think the most intuitive way that we can go about building this component is by starting with the JSX, right? By kind of starting with how this is gonna look and then later implement the functionality. And dude, if I say that you're gonna learn a lot in the functionality of this component, that's an understatement, okay? This is gonna be really, really cool and very applicable to all future projects that you're building. You're gonna see, I'm not gonna overpromise right now. I'm just going to show you later and then you'll be the judge, okay? So anyways, let's start with the design. I think it's the most intuitive way to start here. Let's return a div at the top level. And this div will get a class name of relative, of margin top 20, of grid, a grid calls 3, a margin bottom of 20, and a padding bottom of 20 as well. Now let's open this div up, and inside of here, let's create one more div. And this div will get a class name, which is going to be relative, a height, and then in angled brackets, because this is going to be a custom value, we're going to say 73.5 rem. Then an overflow dash hidden, and I missed the angled bracket right here. No, that needs to go after the rem. There we go. So we have the height and then an angled bracket 37.5 rem that way. Then the overflow hidden. After this, we're going to give it a call span of 2, a width of full, a maximum width of 4xl, a flex items dash center, justify dash center, a rounded dash lg for large, a border dash 2, a border dash dashed, there we go, that's gonna make it look very cool, a border gray of 300, a padding of 12, a text dash center, a focus as a pseudo class, right? That's why we put the colon right here, because this is a pseudo class for the focus state. We're gonna say outline dash none because it would look ugly. On focus, a ring dash 2. on focus a ring dash primary, and lastly on focus a ring offset of 2, right? So when you tab into it, it's going to have the little ring effect. It's going to look pretty nice. And then inside of here, we're going to create one more div. This one with a class name of relative, a width of 60, a background opacity of 50, a pointer dash events dash none, and lastly an aspect ratio. And this is going to be also a custom value in angled brackets. And this value will be 896, so 896 divided by 1831. Now, why is this? Because that's the aspect ratio of the image we're going to use as the phone in this case, right? That's literally just the width and height of that image. Now, inside of this div, let's open this up, and this will be the actual phone. But in order for the phone to always maintain its aspect ratio to not size along with the screen, we can use a really neat component that is called the aspect ratio from our UI library. Well, basically what it does is in code, we can pass it a certain ratio right here, and it's always going to maintain that ratio. For example, this 16:9 image right here, it will always stay in 16:9 format, no matter how small or large we drag it. And that's exactly what we want, because if the phone switched aspect ratio, that would look horrible, right? So let's say npx shared cn-ui at latest, add, and then it's aspect dash ratio, and hit enter. That's going to install the component, and then we will be able to import it and actually use it as the phone case. There we go. And after that's done installing, we can actually go ahead and use the aspect ratio right here in our JSX, and that comes from the components UI aspect ratio. As I just showed you in the example, we can pass this something called a ratio, and this is nothing more than a number, right? And in our case, this is going to be 896 divided by 1831. So basically the same thing as the div above. And the class name this is going to get is going to be pointer events none, a relative, a z index of 50, and an aspect dash same thing, right? We can basically just copy and paste this down. Why do we need to pass the aspect again? Because when I was building this, one or the other didn't work, it just worked together. So passing it here and here worked, but passing it individually, just the ratio as a number or just the class name didn't work, and now it just works, which is kind of weird, but it's also like an unimportant detail. This just works, that's all we need to know. And let's pass it a width of full. Beautiful. And inside of here, we are going to use the next.js image. Let's call it next image though, because we're actually going to use something called an image as an icon later on. And to avoid a naming conflict with that, let's name next image instead of just image. So we're going to say import next image from next/image, just to kind of give it a different name. And we can do that because it's the default import, right? And this next image will get an alt tag, and that's going to be phone image. The source is going to be /phone-template.png, which is an image I have prepared for us. And the class name of this is going to be also pointer events none, a z index of 50, and a select-none. There we go. Let's save that. Let's see what happens. And one thing we probably forgot, is in our page at the same level, right, in the design folder right here, we forgot to pass in the props. We haven't done that yet, so our page doesn't know how to render properly. So let's do that. Let's import this component from the ./design configurator, perfect, and then pass in the config ID, which is going to be our configuration.id. Then the image dimensions, which are going to be an object made up of the width and or height. And last thing we're gonna pass in here is the image URL. And this is just going to be the image URL. There we go. Let's hit save. Let's reload our page. And is the dev server still running, by the way? No, it's not. We can completely, let's clear that. Let me end it. There we go. All right, let's close out of this PowerShell. Let's clear this one. And now let's say yarn dev. Damn, that was messy. Okay, let's have one console open, clear it, and then run the dev server in here. I don't like when I have like 3 terminals open and it gets super confusing. Anyways, so let's start back up our development server, and what we expect to see right now is the phone case, right? But that doesn't happen because it says image with source phone template.png is missing required width property, well, we can also just pass it the fill option right here, right? This is a Next.js image specific thing. We can pass it, and once we do, the image is actually going to show up right here. Wow, okay, that looks beautiful. This is gonna be the area where the person can drag their image around over the phone, right? And that already looks really nice with the little Cobra logo up here that I added. Very, very cool. Okay, that's gonna be the foundation for everything here to work. And now let's also add a tiny detail that's gonna be super helpful later on. And that is when you drag around the image right here, right? If we drag this around, then in the areas that are not the phone, it should be more gray than the area that's overlaying the phone, right? To make it clear which areas are on the phone and which are not, right? And in order to do that, let's create a div right here below our aspect ratio, right here with 3 closing divs to go. And this div is going to be self-closing, and it's going to get a class name that is going to be absolute, a z index of 40, an inset of 0, a left of 3 pixels as a custom value, a top dash px, a right also of 3 pixels, there we go, a bottom dash px for 1 pixel, a rounded, and then as a custom value 32 pixels, just like that. And then lastly, a shadow, and this shadow will also be custom. Basically, the shadow is going to be the overlay for all the rest, right? It's not really just a layer, because that wouldn't work well with the z indexes. It needs to be a shadow that this div is casting. So the shadow is going to look a bit weird, a bit unconventional. It's going to be 0 underscore 0 underscore 0 underscore, and now 99999 px underscore RGBA. And now we can actually pass the color value for the shadow. And this one is going to be 229, comma 231 with no spaces, by the way. Then a 235 as the third one. And lastly, the opacity, which will be 0.6. And we can hit save on that. And there it is. It just showed up. It's basically including the entire area, but the phone, right? Not the background of the phone. And that's so important. So only the image that's over the phone is more highlighted, and the rest is kind of grayed out, right? That's exactly what this div is doing right here. And what we can also do is already set the foundation for one really important option later on. That is the color of this case, right? That's going to happen right below the div we just created. As a separate div, this one can also be self-closing. And this one is going to get a class name that is going to be dynamic. So let's use our cn helper function right in here, import that. And the default class name will be absolute, an inset of 0, a left of 3 pixels. So basically the same as before, right? A top of px, a right also of 3 pixels, same thing, and a bottom of px, also same thing, and a rounded dash 32 pixels. Very specific. Now the dynamic thing we're going to apply is going to be a template string. We're going to change this later on. For now, let's hard code this to background blue, let's say 950, for example. Later on, this will actually depend on the option that the user chooses for the phone case color, right? So this could be like red or black or whatever you want, basically, right? And if we now read out the page, then beautiful, the phone case just changed color. Huzzah, right? Magic, it just works by doing it in this div right here that we can later always change, for example, like to a red 950 and read out the page and read out again. There we go. That now it's red. Or a zinc 950, which is going to be our basically black, but it looks kind of nicer than black. It's not pure black, but almost black. It looks very, very nice. Okay, now where is the user image? How do we make the user image draggable around here? And that's going to happen right here below the div we just created, the self-closing one more div down with 2 closing divs to go. That is where we're just going to put the user image for now. So let's create a div right here with a class name that's going to be relative, a width of full and a height of full. And in here, we are going to put a next image. Once again, this can be self-closing. The source is going to be our image URL that we fetched in the server-side component, remember, and now passed down into the design configurator, which is just the uncropped user image. This is going to get a fill. The alt tag is going to be your image. And then the class name is going to be pointer events none. and we can already go ahead and save that. So let's see what happens. Let's reload our page. And what it's gonna do is it's gonna go ahead, fetch the ID from our database, and then display the source. Now the problem is it gives us invalid source prop, and that is because Next.js, for any external image that you want to pull into your app, you basically have to whitelist that domain. In our case, the hosted image domain, utfs.io, which comes from upload thing, right? That's how they provide their files to us. And we need to change that in the Next.js config. We can simply say images, and in here, this is an object, it takes domains, and we can simply paste that domain utfs.io in here and hit save. That's gonna take a long time probably to reload our next.config.mjs. So usually the reload takes a bit longer, but once we give it some time and reload the page, now we actually expect the user image to show up right here, right? And once we verify that's the case, then we can actually see how we can make it draggable. And there it is, very nice. It looks horrible. The phone edges are not working because the image is pushing it out of the boundaries. Of course, that's gonna work later because the image, we don't want it to be right here, right? It shouldn't affect the phone. The phone should always look good, right? Because if we didn't have the image, then the phone case looks perfect in any size, right? If we make it like very small, like that, or make it very large, the edges are always exactly as they need to be. And with the image right there, that's just not the case. So what do we need to do with this image to make it draggable over the phone case? We're gonna use a really nice library to do that, and that is React RND. That is a draggable and resizable React component. It's maintained, by the way, it's super up to date, and it also provides us a ton of customization options that make it look very, very good. About 200,000 downloads per week. That's nice. We can see like a live demo here on the website with a screenshot where they are just kind of dragging around this like tweet or whatever it is. And it's exactly what we want, right? It's a perfect match for us. That's what we're going to use. So inside of our project, let's open up a new terminal and let's say npm install yarn add, doesn't matter, react-rnd, and hit enter. And once that's installed, and probably it won't take very long with npm because I already have it on my machine here. Let's close out of that again. And we can simply import that at the very top of the file. Import rnd from react-rnd, and then use that way down here to wrap this div inside of the rnd component. This is not going to be self-closing, by the way. And we need to wrap our entire div inside of it. And now this RD gives us a ton of options, as I mentioned earlier, that we can choose from, right? For example, we can, well, pass anything that it gives us access to right here, which is a lot. In our case, what we want to do is for now just pass some defaults, right? So the X value by default, this can kind of be anything that you want. I feel like 150 usually works pretty well here. So this is just the position where the image will first be when the user lands on the page, right? The Y can be like a 205. That's what I set it to in the demo, and that works pretty well. And by the way, of course, this needs to be an object that we are passing into default right here. The height and width are important because this also takes those two, right? The height is going to be the image dimensions, and because the user image is probably going to be very large, let's divide that by 4. And of course, same thing for the width, right? This is going to be the image dimensions dot width divided by 4 as well. And oh, we forgot the dot height here because what we're passing in is an object. There we go. And so we're dividing both by 4. The aspect ratio remains the same, but essentially we are making the image way smaller. So when it appears here on the screen, it's not going to be absolutely gigantic, but it's going to be nice and that the user can see where it is, drag it around, resize it however they want. So let's try it out. Let's reload our page and let's see what happens. That is probably going to take some time. Class extends value undefined is not a constructor or null. Interesting. Did we not mark this? Yeah. Okay. So the problem is probably that we did not mark this as a client-side component. Let's do that. That's the entire point. Because RND, of course, relies on user drag events and so on, right? It's heavily client-side, so we need to opt in to the client-side component. All right, there's the image, and we can drag it around the phone. The areas that are not on the phone or over the phone are kind of grayed out, which is amazing. and the areas that are over the phone are kind of more visible, more opacity. Perfect. And we can already resize the image, but the aspect ratio is not maintained. That is horrible. So the user will completely mess up their image if they drag it around. And also the edges just don't look very good here. Like, yeah, you can tell that you can resize it, but for example, apps like Canva do it much better, where there's like big controls here on each corner that make it very clear that you can actually resize this image. And those are actually pretty easy fixes with React R&D as well, because it completely allows us to customize anything that we want, such as, right, the resize handle component. Let me show you how this works. This is going to be really, really cool. First off, let's lock the aspect ratio, by the way, just so we fix that the aspect ratio changes as the user drags it around. Now that doesn't happen anymore. It will always remain the same aspect ratio. Perfect. That's much better. And then let's pass in something called the resize handle component right here. This takes an object, and basically we can define for each item, like the bottom left, bottom right, each corner of this draggable component, how it should look, how the corner should look. And in our case, we're going to create a custom component for that. And that's going to be super simple component. Let's create it in our components folder, new file. Let's call it handle component.tsx. And this is, of course, const handle component, going to be an arrow function. And let's export default handle component at the very bottom right here. And now what is going to return? Very, very simple, just a self-closing div element. And this div is going to get a class name, I said, there we go, of width 5, a height of 5, a rounded dash full, a shadow, border, BG of white, a border zinc of 200, then a transition, and lastly on hover a BG dash primary. And we can save that. That's literally already it. We can now pass this handle component into the resize handle component function that takes things like the bottom right. This is gonna be our handle component. There we go. We need to import that, self-closing. Perfect. Same thing for the bottom left. Same component. Basically, we can just copy and paste this down. Let's put a comma at the end here, Alt Shift arrow down once and twice. And this is not going to be the bottom left now, it's going to be the top right. And same thing for the top left right here as well. And once we save that, you're going to see what happens. It's going to be really, really cool. There are now these little dots on each edge that make it much easier to resize this entire thing. Right? As long as we're somewhere on that area with our mouse, we can resize this entire thing. That is awesome. And one thing we can also do to improve this is give the R&D a class name. And that class name is going to be absolute, a z index of 20, a border of 3px as a custom value, and a border dash primary. And once we save that, that's going to give the entire thing a green outline. Now, because the image already has an outline, this very specific image looks kind of weird for me, but it's going to look much better for you if your image doesn't have an outline. I mean, you can see it right now if you're following along on your image. It's going to look much nicer. It's very clear where the boundaries of the image are, and it's just a much nicer experience to resize it and drag it around. Nice. Great. And that's a really important part of this design configurator done. Essentially the whole left side, right? With where the user will be able to control their image and how exactly it will be put on the phone. So we're going to continue on the right hand side right here, because what's missing is all the configuration options, like which iPhone model this is for, the color, the material, the finish, and so on. And that's going to live right here, below the closing R&D, below the closing div, and with one closing div to go. That's where we're going to create a new div right now, and that's going to get a class name, and that's going to be, and let's give this a lot more space. There we go. And that class name is going to be a height of, and now as well, 37.5 rem, so same height as the entire phone area, right? A flex dash col, and a BG of white. To kind of be separate from the rest of the page. And inside of here, we are going to install a component from our UI library, and that's gonna be let's get rid of that, npx shared cn-ui at latest add scroll-area, and hit enter. And while that installs, we can already take a look at what this does. Let's pull this up. Essentially, I mean, the name is kind of exactly what it is, right? If we put a lot of stuff into the scroll area, then it's not going to expand too much vertically, but it's going to stick to a certain height and instead have like a beautiful scroll bar for us to scroll through. And that's how we're going to create the effect on the right side with the finish material and so on. This is all going to be inside of a scroll area. So let's say this red thing was the scroll area, right? If we have like the finish and the material in here and a bunch of other options, right? Then we can, like the iPhone model, for example, is also going to be in here. The model that the user can choose from. And you can basically kind of scroll through this instead of it being like super long on the page. That's not really what we want, right? And in order for that to happen, we are going to use the scroll area, and that should be installed. Perfect. Let's give this a lot more space and then wrap this entire thing inside of the scroll area that we can now import from our own UI components. Beautiful. This is going to get a class name, and that's going to be relative, a flex of 1, and an overflow dash auto. There we go. Let's open this scroll area up, and inside of here, first thing is going to be a self-closing div element. And this div element is basically going to act as a little gradient just to make the scroll area look nicer. So we're going to give it an area hidden, and that is going to be true because if you're on a screen reader, then you don't need to know about this div. It's purely like visual. It's just for decoration. And the class name is going to be absolute z10 inset x of 0, a bottom of 0, a height of 12, a bg gradient to t, so to top, a from dash white. That's how it's going to start the gradient at the bottom. And then also a pointer events none. And because we're not passing it a to value, for example, to red 500, that's not what we're doing. Therefore, it's going to fade into transparency, right? So it's just going to act as like a one-way gradient on our page. So if we save that, we might already be able to see something. Let's pull this up into a kind of side-by-side view, give it a lot more space, and then let's reload the page. Okay, right now we're not really able to see it, right? Because the options are not there. There is nothing to choose from yet. But as we implement that right now, you're going to see exactly what that gradient does. So let's create a div down here, right below the self-closing div. And this one will get a class name of padding x8, a padding bottom of 12, and a padding top of 8 as well. Now, inside of here, let's create an h2 element. And this will say customize your case. Beautiful. And this h2 is going to get a class name, and that's going to be a tracking dash tight, a font dash bold, a text of 3XL, and that's it. Let's format this, save the page, and hopefully we will be able to see what that looks like. And there we are, customize your case. Okay, great. And now below this h2, let's create a self-closing div element. And this is just going to act as a separator between this h1 and the content that will be below it. So the configuration options, right? So we're going to give this a width of full, a height of px for 1 pixel, a background zinc of 200, and lastly a margin y of 6 to kind of space it out from both the heading and the stuff that's going to be living right below it. Then below this div, you can see the separator pop up here. And by the way, what we don't have yet, but what we're going to have soon is that, and why did this go out of the side-by-side, by the way? Hey, go back into the side-by-side. There we go. Is that this stuff will actually be below the main phone configurator when we are on very small devices. So it's going to be fully responsive. Now, below this separator, let's create a div element. This one is going to get a class name of relative, margin top 4, height full, flex dash call, and justify between. Okay, now inside of this div, let's open it up. We are going to create our first kind of radio group. And that will be, if we kind of just write the text here right now, let's see where that's going to pop up. So let's reload the page. You don't have to type this out. Why is there an error? Hydration failed. That's fine. Let's just reload the page. Sometimes that happens. Of course, not in the final production build. And right here, that's where the first radio option will be. And in order to make that happen, we're going to make use of a UI library. And that is called, let's open up our terminal, npm install add headless UI/React. This is a UI library that is made by the creators of Tailwind CSS. So if you go ahead and check this out, headless UI/React, let's see right here. last published 12 days ago. Nice. Also a lot of installs. Now installs are kind of subjective, right? Kind of the stupidest npm packages have a lot of installs. For example, there's a package called isEven. I'm not sure if it's one word or if it's separated by a hyphen, but last published 7 years ago. This one got like 200,000 downloads per week. And last published was 7 years ago. I mean, what would you publish? It's literally just, it tells you if a number is even or not. It's literally the most mundane package. And it's got like 200,000 installs per week, which is insane. Okay, this one doesn't, but you get the point, right? The package quality doesn't always correspond to how many downloads it has. But the last publish is usually a pretty good indicator to tell how well maintained a package actually is. And the question is, why are we mixing two different UI frameworks, right? Why are we using headless UI for this section right here and using Shadcn and UI for the rest? And the reason is that the Shadcn radio options are not good. I don't like them. And the radio group we're going to use from our headless UI library is really good. Let me show you. So let's go to the very top and let's say import radio group from add headless UI, and we can probably also auto import that. Yeah. And now way down where we just were right here, let's open up this div, and this is where we're going to use this radio group element. This is not going to be self-closing, but a regular JSX tag. And this expects two things. First off, it expects the value. What is the currently chosen option in our radio group? And we are going to do a very proper, good implementation for this. So we're not going to hard code the value down there in our radio group, but instead, as the user chooses a different option, of course, it should change. Therefore, we need to keep track of these options in state, in React state, right? So we're going to call this options, and by convention, set options as the second array destructure element. And this will be equal to use state, where we are destructuring from. This is a function that takes an object, and the first thing we're going to create in here is the color. Now, we could just say, for example, black as the default color, right? But that's not really what we want to do. Instead, I want to show you a much better approach. And for that, let's close out of so many of these files and open up our sidebar. We are going to create a new folder in our source. And then we're going to create it right here. Let's create a new folder, and let's call it validators. And inside of this new folder, let's create a new file called option-validator.ts. And now inside of this file, later on, we're actually going to write a runtime validator. You're going to see what that looks like, so we can make sure that we always get the data we expect on our backend. So for security, that is a really good idea. For now, we're simply going to define all the options a user can choose from in the single file. So if we make changes here, those are going to be reflected everywhere where we use it across our whole app. For example, the design configurator. So we're going to export a const and then in all caps lock colors. Because this is a constant value, right? This will not change. This is a great convention, as I told you about earlier, to always know that this is a constant value. No matter where you see it in your app, you right away know it. And each object that we are going to put in here will get a label. For example, the first option will be black. The value will be black. And lastly, the TW, the tailwind color we want to apply if this is selected, is going to be zinc 900. Great. Okay, let's give this a bit more space. Let's create the second object in here. The label for this one is going to be blue. The value is going to be blue as well, but this time with a small b, just like with a black. And lastly, the TW, the tailwind, is going to be blue 950. So a bit darker. And last option we're going to let the user choose from is going to be the label rose. The value is going to be rose with a lowercase r, and the TW is going to be a rose 950. Now, if you want to offer any different colors, they go right here, of course, right? You can offer like orange, yellow, green, whatever you want. You can basically put it here. That totally works. We're going to leave it at these three just to demonstrate, and then we're going to say as const at the end of the array, which is going to help us later, basically telling TypeScript that this is not an array of any objects like this, but it's literally an array of the exact strings that are in here. So if we say as const and hover over this again, now it's an array with exactly 3 elements with exactly the strings we have, and not just any strings and any array length, right? So we make very sure this is an array that never changes. at runtime at least, right? That's the point. And we always know it's exactly 3 elements and exactly these elements that are on here. That's what the ascons means, and that helps us in TypeScript later on. You're going to see exactly why. Now, in the design configurator, instead of hard coding the option that we had previously, we can now actually say that we want by default the colors that we can now import at the index of 0 to be the first selected color. And to get full type safety as to what our colors can be set to, right? That's exactly what I just mentioned. That's where the as constant comes in clutch. So we can pass a generic into the use state to tell TypeScript what the type will be or what the allowed types are, right? And for the color, what are the allowed types? Well, basically black, blue, or rose, right? Any of these separate objects is an allowed value inside of our state. So all we need to do is to say that color, the allowed types are type of colors at a certain number. So for example, this entry, or this entry, right? And what that does is now everywhere where we set the color, we get full type safety, right? We know what the allowed values are. For example, that's going to happen in our radio group right here, right? The value is nothing else than the options.color. And of course, there needs to be an equal sign here. There we go. And then the on change. What happens if the value is changed in the radio group? First off, we get a callback function in which we handle all the logic, right? And we get access to the new value, right? If we hover over this, the new value, awesome. We get full type safety. We know that any selected value will be either color of our allowed colors, like rose, blue, or black, right? That is beautiful. How does it know that? Well, because the value is one color of those 3. That's exactly why the isConst we added at the very end is so helpful. So inside of this callback function, we can now simply say set options, and we receive all the previous values as the callback function parameter, that is right here, the previous. So we can simply return an object directly to set our new options, and that object is going to contain all the previous options. We're going to spread them in there, and then the color is going to be our new value. Basically, all this means is all the other options. Right now, we don't have any other options, but later that's going to be like the texture or the finish. They're going to remain the exact same as the previous ones. Just the color is going to be our new value that was just selected in the onChange, right? So we're only changing the color right here. Beautiful. Let's save that. Let's see what it looks like, because right now we won't really be able to see anything. Right? If we reload the page, nothing happened. Why is that? Well, because our radio group is actually empty. We didn't put anything inside here yet. So let's do that. The first thing we're going to put in here is a label. And that label is going to come from our UI library as well. Let's say npx shared cn-ui at latest add label and hit enter. That's going to install our label component, and once that's done, beautiful, we can close out of this and simply use the label right here in our JSX coming from our custom component. Let's give this a bit less space, by the way. This label is going to say color, and it's also going to display the current selected color, which is nothing else than the options.color and then of course the label, right? Because the label is the human readable version like black or blue or rows of our current option. Okay, so let's save that. We should already see that pop up here on our page. Beautiful. Black is by default selected because that's what we put as the default right here. If this was 1, for example, and we reloaded the page, then you would see that blue is by default selected, but we want to leave it as 0 as black. Now, to actually let the user choose between the different options, let's create a div element and give this a lot more space. This div element, and that's a bit too much, let's leave it like that. We're going to worry about the responsiveness later, just so we have everything on the page right now. This div element we just created is going to get a class name. That's going to be margin top 3, flex items-center, a space x of 3. And that's already it. Now, inside of here, we can map over all the available colors. And since we have already defined all colors that are available, well, nothing easier than that. We can just map over those. We're going to say colors.map. And for each color, we are going to return some JSX right away. And that's going to be a radio group, group, there we go, dot option. that we can choose right here. Now, because we're mapping, first thing we're going to do is pass a key into here, which is just going to be the color.label as a unique value for each option. And this also takes a value, which is important to pass in here because it's needed for this to work, and that's going to be our color that we're mapping over. Great. Now, each radio option is also going to get a class name. The class name is going to be dynamic. So let's use our CN helper function and import that right here. And by default, the class name we're going to pass into here is going to be relative minus m minus 0.5, just a small negative margin, a flex, a cursor dash pointer, items dash center, a justify dash center, a rounded full, a padding of 0.5 to offset the negative margin. Then after the padding 0.5, an active ring 0, so with the pseudo selector a ring 0, on focus a ring 0 as well, we want to hide that. On active, an outline dash none, on focus an outline dash none as well, a border 2, and lastly a border transparent. There we go, that's the class name. And now the dynamic part we're going to apply here is going to be our tailwind. Well, basically what we defined right here as the tailwind option, right? So I'm going to skip back in case you missed anything. This is the entire class name. And then as for the dynamic part, we are going to apply a dynamic key. So in angled brackets, a template string, and this is going to be border dash, and now in dynamic, the color.tw. So a border zinc 950, for example, or the border blue, but we only want to apply this class name to kind of give it an outline if this is the currently selected color that we are mapping over, right? So only the selected colors kind of stick out with a nice outline. How do we know if this is the currently selected item or not? And that's really easy actually with the headless UI React, because this class name, we can simply cut everything here. So let's mark it and press Ctrl X, and don't worry, we're not getting rid of it, we're just moving it, because what I want to show you is this is actually a callback function, the class name, that is simply going to return everything we just had, right? Nothing changes about that. But the cool thing is we can destructure now both the active and also the checked state from the radio group option, and that's how we know when it's active or when it is checked. And we're simply going to apply this conditional class name of the border now if either the current state is active or the current state is checked, right? That's all the logic that's going to happen here. If we save that, then we should already be able to see something, hopefully. And we are able to see, well, something on our page. It's like a little dot. It looks super weird. And to make it look way better, let's open up the radio group dot option. And inside of here goes a span element. And this is actually going to be self-closing. And the class name of this span element is going to be dynamic as well with our CN helper function. So what are we going to combine in here? What is going to be dynamic? Well, the template string first. BG, and then in dynamic syntax, the color.tw. So the rose or the blue or the zinc or whatever color the user is currently chosen. And then the second element as a separate string that we're going to pass into this function is going to be the normal class name. So a height of 8, a width of 8, a rounded full. We're also going to apply a border dash black, and then a border opacity of 10. Right, so pretty low opacity. Let's save that and see what happens, because hopefully we will be able to see that one thing doesn't work yet, and I want to show you why. Okay, and we kind of do. Well, we get the colors right here. We get these beautiful little dots that we can choose from, but they don't actually have color. Why is that? And I mean, technically it would be logical if these have colors, right? BG, and then we apply the color.tw, which is nothing else than like zinc 900, blue 950, rose 950. So the class name that results from that is actually valid. So if we try to inspect this element and see, well, what is the class name? It has a class of BG zinc 900. That's like the Tailwind class name for a black kind of background, right? Why isn't it applying? And the answer is that Tailwind doesn't actually support dynamic class names like these out of the box. And a really simple, or the most simple kind of hack to make that happen that I read about online is to actually simply include these colors as comments in your code. And this works surprisingly well. Let me show you. As a comment above the colors, we're going to say BG blue 950 and also border blue 950 because that's what we're going to use later. Now using Shift, Alt and arrow down, we can copy this down once and twice. And for the second comment, we're going to change this to zinc. By the way, if you're wondering how I selected two at the same time, well, you select the first one and then you press Ctrl D. That's going to select both of them. Second one is going to be zinc, and then the third one is going to be rose. So for every color that we have, we include it as a comment. And as long as we include these as comments anywhere in our code, it doesn't even matter. That's the funny thing. If we now reload the page, bam, the class names actually work. The dynamic class names, the colors actually show up. And the reason that zinc is not working is actually because this is 900 and not 950. So it actually needs to match like the exact dynamic class name that you want to import later. There's other ways to do this, right? But I think this is the best way. There, you can do like lookup tables if you want. And there we are. The zinc color just popped up. Beautiful. And now the active color is actually selected with an outline. Can close out of that and give this a lot more space. This is some very nested JSX, by the way. The active color is actually now selected with a beautiful outline, and the color is updating in real time using React State as well up here in the label. That is awesome. Now, okay, there's gonna be other options that the user can choose from, but do you remember when we initialized the phone case background color way up here in this div right here? We already made this dynamic, but currently hard-coded it to zinc 950 for the phone case background. Now, how cool would it be if we can simply change this to now use the options.color.tw and hit save. So let's see what happens. Ideally, as we change this, wabam, or phone case background changes. Dude, that is awesome. That gives us full flexibility as for the colors that you want to apply. And now because we made this, we structured this so nice, we can simply go into our validators. And if you want to add a color right here, bam, just create a new color with like a yellow 950, whatever, include it as a comment. And there you are. There's your new color. As easy as that. No needing to change the JSX. The core logic remains the same. And it's not an exact match of the model view controller pattern, right? Because that involves fetching data from the server, but it goes in the direction of that you're not really mixing application logic too hard with the actual displaying of that logic, right? We're kind of separating out the colors there are in a separate file in a separate area. So adding one does not actually change anything about the way we render anything out, right? And I think that is a really good idea to structure your apps that way, because it's just more maintainable. It's just more fun to work in later on. And if you ever need to change something, you don't need to kind of think yourself into how are we rendering this, but you just need to add a new option here. As easy as that. Great. Okay, that is our color customization done. Now, what is the next thing? The next thing is going to be the model that the user can choose from. So like iPhone 11, iPhone 12, iPhone 13, and so on. And that's going to live right below our radio group right here. Let's create a new div. And this one is going to get a class name of relative, flex, flex-call, gap of 3, and a width of full. And let's open up this div. And inside of here is going to live our label. And this is going to say model. There we go, not model. And if we reload the page, then we're going to see that pop up. It pops up right here below our colors. But one thing that is not currently happening is that these are actually spaced out. So below our div and above our radio group, the first one, let's create one more div. And this div will get a class name, and that's going to be flex, flex-call, and a gap of 6. And this div will just be responsible for kind of spacing out the individual items that the user can choose from. All right, so we're going to cut out using Control X the closing div and paste it after our radio group, or I mean this div right here now, because this div is going to contain all the radio groups, right? And if we now save our page, we pasted the div right here. Let's reload that again. We can see now it's nicely spaced out below each other. Beautiful. And now for the dropdown of where you can choose your phone model. That will also be handled by our UI library in a fully accessible, beautiful, out-of-the-box kind of dropdown that we're going to use to make this happen. And To install it, we're gonna go into our terminal. Let's clear this and say npx shared cn-ui at latest, add dropdown-menu, and then hit enter. That's gonna install the dropdown menu once again into our local project, into components UI. That's where it stores. That's where it stores all the different kind of stuff that it installs from our UI library, and that's where it just puts the code with 0 abstractions, with all the class names for us to change if we wanted to, right? But we're not going to do that right now because this works so nicely out of the box. We can now simply go ahead and import the drop-down menu component from components UI drop-down menu. Beautiful. Inside of here, this takes a drop-down menu trigger that we can also import from the same spot, right, or custom components. And this trigger will get something called an asChild property right here. And all that does is by default, this trigger will actually be a button, and we don't want that, right? We want to pass our own button right here that we can simply import from our UI library, because it looks much better than the default trigger. And by using the asChild property, we can simply say, don't render this out as a button itself, because then we would have two buttons, right? That's not good. But just use the child as the actual trigger and just pass your properties on to it automatically, right? And this button is going to get a variant of outline. It's going to get a role, and that's going to be combo box. There we go. The class name of this button will be a width of full and a justify dash between. All right, now inside of this button, we're simply going to use the options dot, well, now what do we use here? Dot what? Dot like color? No, not really. This is the model. This is very separate from the color. And if we take a look at how we did this for the color, what did we put in there? Well, basically it was, where is it? The option.color.label, right? So what we expect to happen here, similarly, same API, right? It would be the options.model.label, but that doesn't exist yet. We don't have an options.model. Therefore, let's create it in the same kind of way as we did it for the colors, right? We can simply export a const models from this file. And if we want to add a model at any time, we can do it right here in this file without having to worry at all about the rendering logic, right? And this is going to be an object that gets a name property, and this is going to be models. And then this is going to get the options, which are an array of individual objects, each one containing an iPhone model, right? So the first option will be an object. As the label, we're going to say iPhone X. So this is what's going to be visible to the user. So we nicely want to format it. And then as the value, we're going to say iPhone X as one word, no spaces, all lowercase, how we are internally going to identify this model. Okay, same thing. Let's mark this entire object. Let's hold Shift, Alt, and arrow down, copy it down, change the X to an iPhone 11, and then the value also to an iPhone 11. You can probably imagine what we're going to do next. Same thing, bam, iPhone 12, and also, and also change that to iPhone 12. Same thing for the iPhone 13. There we go. And let's just copy this down 2 more times now. 1, 2. Change the first one to 14 and 14. And then the last one to the 15. There we go. Great. And by the way, if the iPhone 16 should already be out whenever you're watching this, I don't know when you're watching this, then of course you can also add the iPhone 16 down here if you want. And let's also mark this whole thing as const, same reason as before. So we can now very easily use this in our JSX, right? That's the beauty of the asConst. So what we can now do is say options.model.label. So same logic as we had before with the colors. And of course, in order for this to work, we still need to add the model to our state in order to make it changeable by the user in real time. Therefore, first off, let's define the TypeScript type of what the model will be. So the model will be the type of models that we can now import from our validators. Dot options, because we only care about the options for the state, at a certain number. So all this means is this can be something like the iPhone X, the iPhone 11, iPhone 12. Each one of these objects will be valid as the model. And of course, that also means we got to pass a default model. And this will be the models.options at the index of 0. So this will be the iPhone X. So the first array element by default. You could also make this the last one, so the most modern iPhone if you want to it doesn't really matter. I'm just gonna go with the iPhone X here. Let's save that and scroll back down right here, because what should happen already if we read out the page is that we should see the drop-down menu trigger at least show up, because that's what we've already created right here with the button, right? And it does. There is the iPhone X, beautiful. However, right now we can't really choose anything here, right? If we click this, nothing really happens. That's not ideal. And before we worry about that, let's finish up this button by adding a chevrons up-down icon right here that we get from Lucid React right below our label. This is going to be self-closing, and it will get a class name that's going to be margin left 2, a height of 4, a width of 4, a shrink dash 0, so it never gets smaller than these dimensions of the height and width that we just passed it, and an opacity of 50, so it's not too visible, but it's indicating that, hey, you can choose different models, that this is a drop-down. And then as the content, what should show up when you click this trigger, that's going to be defined in the drop-down menu content that we can also import from our UI library. Now let's give this a bit more space to work with, and inside of the drop-down menu content is where we want to display, well, basically all the options that the user has to choose from, all the iPhone models, right? So we're going to say models.options.map, and for each model that we get access to in the callback function, we are going to return some JSX right away. And what we are going to return is going to be a drop-down menu item, something we also get from our UI library that we can simply import, webam, right here. And of course, because we're mapping, the top level thing always needs to contain a key. And in our case, that's going to be simply the model.label, right? That's going to be the unique thing we're going to use as the key. And now the class name each drop-down menu item gets is going to be dynamic. So let's use our CN helper function in here. And the default class name that we're always going to apply is going to be flex, a text of SM for small, a gap of 1, an items-center, a padding of 1.5, a cursor of default and not pointer, and on hover, we're going to apply a BG zinc of 100 to this drop-down menu item. And now for the dynamic part, so still inside of the CN function, let's pass an object, and we are going to apply a background zinc of 100 under the condition that the model.label is triple equal to the model.label. And all that check means is if this is the current selected version that's also in the state, then we are going to display, oops, I did a typo here, BG zinc dash 100. There we go. So if this is the currently selected option, in that case, we are going to apply a little BG zinc of 100, a little darker background, right? So if we reload our page, then hopefully we should be able to see, well, we won't be able to see much, but if we just go ahead and render out the model.label right here already in our drop-down menu item and then save that and reload the page again, now the drop-down menu should actually already work. So let's reload it and see. There we are, that works. And the current active item will have little background, right? We're not handling any state changes yet, so we can't switch the phone model. We're going to add that right now. But as you can see, the iPhone X has like a little dark background. And that's exactly what this condition right here does for us. Beautiful. So we know that works. That is awesome. Now let's implement that when you click a different iPhone model that actually changes the state. And that's going to happen inside of the onClick handler for each drop-down menu item. This onClick simply takes a callback function, and this is just going to say set options, and we're going to set the options to whatever they were previously. So we're going to return an object saying ... prev. So we're not changing any of the color or the texture or the finish, nothing of that sort, just the iPhone model that we're going to pass in separately. So we're only changing the model to the one that was just selected, that we're mapping over, right? That's all we're doing. And now as a tiny little detail, but it's really cool, we're going to add a little check mark in front of the current iPhone that is selected. That's going to happen above our label inside of a check icon we get from Lucid React. This can be self-closing, and this check will get a class name. And this class name is going to be dynamic. So we're going to use our cn helper function for this. The default one we're going to apply is going to be a margin right of 2, a height of 4, and a width of 4 as well. And the conditional one we're going to apply is if the model.label is triple equal to the options.model.label, so the currently selected one, right? This is the one we're mapping over. This is the currently selected one in state. In that case, we're going to say opacity 100. And in the other case, we're going to say opacity 0. So it's going to be hidden, but it's still going to take up the space, which is important. So if we reload the page, then you're going to see each check mark will have like a reserved space now in the drop-down kind of menu. If it didn't have that, then that would look super weird. When all the text would be left except the one with the check mark, that would look really bad. So we are reserving the space for each check mark and only applying it if that is the currently selected phone. Beautiful. So now we can actually change between phone models, and that is reflected in real time in our state as well. And that's how the user is able to configure which phone model the case should be for. Very, very nice. We've got the color already, rose, blue, and black. And the iPhone model works perfectly as well. Beautiful. And now let's do the material that they can choose from, the beautiful radio buttons and the finishes that the user can also choose from, right? Between, I believe it was textured and smooth finish, right? That is also going to live, of course, in our option validator in a separate file. So if we ever need to change it, then we can do so right here without again, having to worry about the render logic. That's why I like this so much. So first thing we're going to do is define the materials. What materials are there going to be? Let's say export const in all caps lock materials, because this is a constant, as an object. The name is going to be material. That's how we recognize this in state. And then the options are going to be an array, just like before with the iPhone models, right? And each option in here is going to be an object with a label. And the first label is going to be silicone. The value, how we internally identify this, is going to be silicone, but with a lowercase s at the start. The description is going to be undefined. This is just for TypeScript important later, so each field will have a description value. So TypeScript knows, but this one won't actually have any text here. You're going to see why in a second. And the price is going to be, and well, we could just put the price right here, right? We could just say 0 for the silicone, but we're not going to do that. One much better approach is that we define the product prices somewhere else as well. And we're going to do that inside of a separate folder, in our source folder, and let's call that folder config. And these are values just like constants, but the difference to the validators is that these won't actually validate anything at runtime. These are just static files, like for example, the products.ts file that we're going to create in our config folder. And this is going to be all the configuration we need for our products. For example, let's say export const product underscore prices. And if we ever need to change the prices of our products, we can simply do so inside of our config, right? These are static things that we use across our app, similar to the option validators, with the only difference being and that we're going to define later on a runtime validator here. The products won't have that, so they live inside of the config. The material prices, let's care about those first. The silicone is going to be 0. And then the polycarbonate, let's say that is going to cost 5_00. So what is the underscore? That's just a fancy way of formatting JavaScript numbers. It's the same thing as a 500, which is basically in cents, right? That's going to be important for later when we handle the checkout, that it's actually in cents and not in actual dollars. And the underscore is just a nice way of formatting this, so it's very clear this is $5.00, right? That's just a little hack. If you have like a really long number, like 1 million, you can simply format it like that and it will be calculated as a million, just like before. But this is just much nicer for you as a developer to intuitively understand what a number is, especially at like really long numbers. That's much easier, you know, as to compare it if the underscores are not there. So just a little life hack. Maybe if you didn't know it, that's really, really useful. And then the finish right here, the finish price is the smooth one. Let's define that as 0 as well. No extra cost for that. And then the premium one, the textured, is going to be, let's say, $3 extra. Or if you want, of course, you can put this to any custom price that you want, if you want something else here. And then let's define this as an sconst for the same reasons as before, so it's easier to work with in TypeScript. Awesome. So these product prices coming from our config are now going to be used right here in our materials. We can say the silicone material will have a price of product underscore prices. We can simply import that now, dot material dot and now silicone, right? Full type safety here. Beautiful. And as for the soft polycarbonate, we can simply copy down this material option using Alt Shift arrow down. Bam. Let's change the label. This is going to be soft polycarbonate. So that is what's going to show up right here in our actual like menu. Then the internal identifier is just going to be polycarbonate. There we go. We can leave away the soft, and the description for the polycarbonate is going to be actually a string now. This is going to be scratch resistant coating. There we go. And as for the price, of course, we're not going to use the silicone one, but the polycarbonate price that we defined, which is, I believe, like $5 extra. If you want this kind of premium option configured for your phone case. And of course, also use the sconst at the very end. And the cool thing is, because this is a very reusable way of declaring certain options in your app, in this case, what the user can choose from, we can simply mark all the materials and also copy and paste it down using Shift Alt arrow down. Wabam, we can copy paste it down and now change the materials simply to the finishes. In the structure, they are going to be the exact same. Both are going to have a name. This one is going to be finish. And both are going to have pretty much the same options, only with different labels and prices. So the finish is going to be smooth finish as the label. As the value, this is going to be smooth. The description is going to stay undefined, but the product price, of course, is going to change. This is not going to be a material, but instead is going to be the finish that we defined. Dot, and then of course you can probably guess the smooth finish price, which is $0 extra. Same thing for the second option. The label is going to be textured finish. The value is going to be textured. The description is going to be soft grippy texture. That's what's going to appear actually in the button. That's going to be visible to the user. And then the price is going to be the finish dot, you can probably guess, the textured finish. And as easy as that, we added a completely different option to whatever the user can choose from. And now we are all ready to actually display them on the page right here for the user to select whatever they want to go for. Very, very easily, right? Because all the work is done very reusably here in this file. So we can now simply go ahead into our JSX, and below the drop-down menu, below the closing div after that, with 3 closing divs to go, this is where we're simply going to map over both the materials and also the finishes inside of an array. We can simply say .map and return some JSX straight away from here. And now also, of course, import both the materials and the finishes. And the beautiful thing is, because the materials and the finishes are the exact same structure, they both have a name, they both have options with the same label, value, description, and price. Same thing, pretty much. We can destructure right away. For example, the name, we can also destructure the options, and in our case, we are going to rename the options to selectable options and not leave them as the default to avoid naming conflicts later on, right? And the JSX we're going to return from here is going to be a radio group at the top level. Each one, of course, again, because we're mapping, needs to receive a key. Otherwise, React will be pretty mad at us. And in our case, the key is just going to be the name, right? So this is going to be either the finish or the material as the key right here. And the value of each radio group will be the options at the index of name, just like so. Now, TypeScript is, of course, going to be pretty mad at us because this doesn't exist yet. It's basically saying, dude, what are you doing? What the hell are you trying to do here? There is no options at the index of name because the name is material or finish, and our state doesn't actually have a key that is material or finish. Of course, right? Because we didn't define that. So to make TypeScript very happy with us, we're going to define the material key right here. And this is simply going to be the type of materials dot options at a certain number. And then same thing for the finish, right? Each finish is going to be the type of finishes dot options at a certain number. And that's going to be fully type safe because we define it as constant in that file. And now, of course, to define default values for these, what should be the default material? Well, probably the one that has no extra cost associated with it, right? So silicone, probably. You could also select the more expensive one by default, but that's probably gonna make your users a bit upset because that's not really the user expectation, right? By default, always the cheapest one is probably should be selected. The material by default is going to be the materials dot options at the index of 0, which is going to be the cheapest one we just talked about. Same thing for the finish. That's going to be the finishes dot options at the index of 0 as well. And all of a sudden, bam, TypeScript is super happy with us. It knows that these exist in our state now because we told it about that. And now we don't get any more errors right down here where we are mapping over both the materials and the finishes. And we're actually able to continue here and get this done. So the value is going to be the options at the index of name. And on change, what should happen if a user selects a new material or finish? Well, basically, we want to update our state, and we get access to the value that the user selected in the callback function and can work with it later in the callback function to now update our state, right? So we're going to set the options, we're going to set the state to everything it was previously that we get access to in this callback function by simply returning an object directly, spreading in all the previous values, so we're not changing anything besides the current name. And we're going to set that to the value. Now, if you're not familiar with the syntax, why did we put this in angled brackets? Basically, this is dynamic now. The name can be both. Let's visualize this. This name can be both material, or it can also be finish, right? We don't know because we're mapping over both and it could be both of them. We don't really know which one, but that's no problem because both finish and material exist in our state, right? Both of these are a key in our state, material and finish. So whichever one is actually selected doesn't really matter. That's the one we're going to set to the new value, which is like silicone, polycarbonate, etc., etc. All the options that there are for material or finishes. So either way, we're totally fine. The correct value is going to be updated in our state. And this is just a really clean way of doing so, of updating our state like that. Okay, beautiful. Now inside of this radio group, let's open that up. And first thing we're gonna do here is create a label, not a label A, but a regular label. There we go. And inside of here, we're gonna say the name.slice from 0 to 1 dot to uppercase. So we're gonna capitalize the first letter in the current name and going to attach the rest of name.slice starting at 1. So everything besides the first letter. So all we're doing is basically taking the name like material or finish and then uppercasing the first letter so it looks correct when we render it out. If we didn't do this, then both of these would be lowercase and that would just look a bit weird, I guess. Now, after this label, we're going to create a new div, and this one is going to get a class name of margin top 3 and a space y of 4 to vertically space out the elements a bit. And inside of this div, let's map over the selectable options. So we're going to say selectable options.map, and for each option that we get access to in the callback function, we are directly going to return some JSX. And each thing that we want to render out at the top level here is going to be a radio group dot option, just like before, right? And again, because we're mapping, first thing as always is going to be our key. That's going to be our option dot value in this case. Very, very nice. And as always, each radio group option also takes a value, and this is simply going to be the option that we are currently mapping over. And lastly, this takes, of course, the class name. How do we want to style this? This is going to be dynamic as well, just like the options we did before. And once again, this is a callback function. That's why I like this radio group from Headless UI so much, that we can simply destructure both the active and also the checked state from to then conditionally style or element, right? To use it in our CN helper function. So by default, the class name we're going to apply here is going to be relative block, a cursor dash pointer, a rounded dash large, a BG of white, padding X of 6, a padding Y of 4, shadow-sm, border 2, border zinc 200, focus outline dash none, a ring of 0, on focus also a ring of 0, then an outline dash none, on small devices a flex, and on small devices a justify dash between as the last default class name. And then as for the dynamic part, we're going to pass an object, and we are going to apply a class name of border dash primary under the condition that either this is an active option or it is the checked option, right? To just kind of make it highlight very nicely. And then inside of our radio group option, let's open that up. Inside of here, first thing, we're going to render out a span element with a class name, and that class name is going to be flex and items center. Let's open this up and let's put one more span element in here with a class name, and this class name is going to be flex dash call and text dash sm for small. Let's open up the second span, and in here goes a radio group dot label as a span element. That's a prop we can pass in here. And inside of this radio group label, let's open that up, we're going to pass the option.label. There we go. That should be the option.label rendered in here. And if you remember what the label is, if we hover over this, we can see silicone, soft polycarbonate, smooth finish, textured finish, basically all the labels we have across the two different categories that we are mapping over here. So TypeScript always knows exactly what's up, and that is so nice. You can use that in all your other projects, by the way. You learn it here, and then you can reuse it on all the projects that you want. Now, this radio group.label will also get a class name, and that class name is not going to be dynamic. I don't know why it assumed that. That's going to be font-medium, and that's also going to be a text gray of 900 in here. Let's give this a bit more space, by the way. There we go. And then after the radio group.label, we're going to do a conditional check. If we have an option.description, in that case, we're going to render out some JSX. And in the other case, where there's no description, where it's undefined, we're going to render out null. And the JSX that we are going to render out is going to be a radio group.description. And I can probably use auto completion here. There we go. Let's open up the description, scroll down a bit, and each description is going to contain a span element. And inside of the span element, we can say option.description and just render that one out. Now, this radio group.description takes a as, and that's going to be a span element. And it also takes a class name, and the class name for this is going to be a string, and it's going to be text gray of 500. So a bit lighter than the text we have up here. And the span element is going to get a class name as well, and that class name is going to be block, and on small devices and upwards, that's going to be inline, just like so. Beautiful. Let's save that and let's see what happens. Let's give our app here a lot more space. Let's reload the page and then see what's up. Oh, all right. This already looks really, really good. We have material, silicone and soft polycarbonate, and we have the finish that we can now choose from between textured, a soft grippy texture, or the smooth finish. And dude, this looks so nice. This is Apple inspired, by the way. Apple does it the same way, right? That's where I got this idea from, and it looks absolutely great. And now the only thing that's missing is how expensive is each option, right? How much more does it add to the price? The user probably has to know that. Very, very important. And Apple does it the same way, by the way, with a price on the right-hand side. So let's do that. Let's display the price to the user. And that's going to happen below the two closing span elements and above the closing radio group.option. This is exactly where we are going to put a radio group.description again. And this one is going to contain a span element. Before we worry about the content of the span element, let's also pass an as span to this radio group.description, which just means that this is going to render as a span element, right? So essentially this will be the same thing as like a span, but with some custom properties that are automatically applied by the UI library. And then the class name we're going to give to the radio group.description is going to be a string of margin top 2, flex, a text dash sm, on small devices a margin left 4, on small devices a margin top of 0, on small devices a flex call, and on small devices a text write. The span element is going to get a class name, and that's going to be font-medium, and it's going to be a text grade of 900. And inside of the span is where we are going to display the price of this item. And instead of actually putting like a dollar sign and then the option.price, we could do that, but that's not a great idea. There is a much better way that I want to show you. And that is going to happen inside of our lib folder. Right here, we're going to create a little helper function inside of our lib/utils. And no dependency, nothing. This is just going to be really cool for formatting prices in JavaScript, because that's built into JavaScript, if you didn't know. Let's export a const and call it format price. And this simply takes in a price as a number. And then this is going to do some stuff. Now, that's not very specific. What is it going to do? First off, we can create a const formatter, and this formatter is going to be equal to a new intl.number format. Hell yeah, that's a built-in formatter. As the format, we're going to choose en-us, and then we can pass this a configuration object. This takes a bunch of stuff that has to do with currency formatting. In our case, the style is going to be currency, and then the currency is going to be USD. And if you ever want to change the currency in your entire shop, or have like a toggle at the nav bar where users can toggle between like Canadian dollars and US dollars and euros and all your other currency, rupees, whatever, that is totally possible to just change in one place here, and then it's going to be changed throughout the entire app. That's why this is so much nicer than just putting $price, right? And then we can simply return the formatter, which now has a function we can call called format. Wow. And we can format the price, right? So this will just return a string. And that's the formatted price in the format that we specified right here. That's awesome. So we can use that instead. We can simply render out the format price of the option.price divided by 100 right here, and import our format price. Why divided by 100? Because if you remember, we have this as cents, right? As we defined in our pricing as 500, 300 to have cents in there as well. And to show the actual price, we need to divide it by 100 again. So if we give this a lot more space, let's reload our page and see what happens. Because we're going to see the price show up right here on the right hand side, extra $5, extra $3, and that just looks so nice. And the user can choose from it. That looks exactly like Apple does it. And if Apple does it, then we're going to have a good experience with it as well. And our users especially, right, are going to have a great experience with it as well. Dude, awesome. And now the last thing that's missing here is the button at the bottom. The button at the very bottom, right? That's what I meant to say. The button at the bottom. That lets us continue to the next step after the user is done kind of dragging around and configuring their image as they want. And that's probably the easiest part, right? Let's do that. Let's implement this button. And that's going to happen right here below our scroll area. This is where we are going to create, and let's give this a bit more space. This is going to get a div element, and this div is going to get a class name of with full, a padding x of 8. Let's give this just a bit more space. There we go. All right, so with a full, a padding x of 8 as we have it, then a height of 16, and lastly a bg of white. Now, inside of here is going to live a self-closing div element, and what the hell did I just do? Inside of here is going to live a self-closing div element. That one gets a class name of height px for 1 pixel, a width of full, and a background zinc of 200. And this is going to act as a visual separator between the above content and this button section that the button is going to live in. Now, in here is going to live another div element. This one gets a class name of width, and this one is going to get a class name of width, and this one is going to get a class name of width full, height full, flex, justify, and items center. There we go. Now let's open this div up. Inside of this div, one more div, and this one will get a class name of width full, flex, a gap of 6, and items dash center. Let's open this one up, and inside of this div is going to live a p tag, a paragraph element. And this one is going to get a class name of font medium. So it's going to be the same font weight as the price in our options right here. And lastly, a white space dash no wrap, which is just going to make the text that is inside of this p tag never wrap, no matter how small it gets, because that would look god awful. All right, and inside of here, we're going to render out our format price utility function. And in here, we're going to pass the base underscore price that we haven't defined yet, but that we should definitely define, which is nothing else than, you can probably imagine what it is. Let's go into our config file. That is gonna be for our product. So source/config/products. This is where we are, where we also defined all the prices for material and finish. Let's from here export a const base underscore price, of course, also in caps. And this is gonna be 14_00. This is just an arbitrary number that I chose, $14 as the base price. I think that's like normal for a phone case. You can put this to anything you want. You can make this 30 if you wanted to have like a really expensive phone case, or 5 if you wanted to have a very cheap phone case. This is really just what I came up with, like $14 as the base price. And then if you choose the premium options, then of course it's gonna be like a bit more expensive by $5 or $3 respectfully. And that means we can now import our base price right here in the design configurator. This will always be the case. And now we can build on top of that with the prices from our state, right? So depending on which option is chosen, silicone or polycarbonate, or smooth finish or textured, we can add to this base price by saying options.finish.price. We can add that, and also plus the options.material.price. And now the entire prices, of course, they're still in thousands. So let's wrap them in parentheses and divide them by 100. There we go. Let's save all of our files and see what that looks like. We should be able to see our price pop up once we reload the page. Let's see. And it should be also visually separated with that little separator we did from the rest. Awesome, that looks very, very nice. Now what's missing, the only thing that's missing is the button on the right hand side that lets the user continue, right? Let's give this like, let's say this much space, that looks good. Now let's create that button. And the button is going to live right below our p tag. Let's create a button element. And in here, we're gonna say continue, and also include a little arrow right icon from Lucid React that gets a class name. Oops, not a console log. What are you thinking? Oh, that's because we haven't imported the arrow right icon from Lucid React. The class name for this icon is going to be a height of 4, a width of 4, a margin left of 1.5, and also an inline. So it's going to be in line with the text. Now, the size for this button is going to be small. And lastly, the class name for this button is going to be a width of full, so it takes up all the space horizontally. And once we save that, we're going to see that button pop up right here. Dude, that looks so nice. We can scroll around here. This content will always stay exactly where it is. And we got a fully working phone customization screen right here with live updates. We can drag around the image as we want, scale it up and down in the exact right aspect ratio. That's awesome. And can choose all the premium options with live updating price, by the way, as we choose between the cheaper and the more premium options. Dude, that is exactly what I'm talking about. That looks so nice. That's fully functional, Apple inspired design. That's exactly how they do it on their website as well. And if like the $1 trillion company like them does it, then we should too, probably, you know, because it's probably a good idea. And that just works really, really nice. Very good work, man. All right, little cut there. Excuse me, just for me, it's the next day. Sometimes I split these up between multiple days because I don't know how long this video is gonna be yet, but chances are it's gonna be pretty long, you know, like 10, 11, 12 hours. And there's no way you can record that in a single day. So just a little cut. Next day for me, just so you know what's happening here. So I just reloaded the page, and the next thing we're gonna do is make what we just created responsive. So if we just go back, just upload any image here, and then we are forwarded to the next step, right? The goal right now is to make that responsive because it wasn't, and it just looked kind of bad on very small devices. So let's let this image upload. Let's verify if everything goes correctly here in our console. And it does. That looks very good because we should be able to see the like green success message here, and then the redirecting. And on localhost, this takes insanely long, right? 8.5 seconds. Earlier, before I was recording, it was like 27.4 seconds. As you can see, that's just crazy, man. That's just way too long, but also my PC is very old. Anyways, what we want to do right now is check this out. This doesn't look very good. Let's go into like a side-by-side view here. This is not responsive. This looks absolutely awful. And the fix for that is actually pretty simple. So what we're going to do is inside our design configurator file that lives right here under configure design configurator, we're going to specify that this grid should be by default a 1-column grid. So we're going to say grid calls, grid-calls-1. And only on large devices and upwards is it going to be grid calls 3 at the very top level div here. And then similarly, what we are going to do is on the other div that had the height of 37.5 rem on this one, where the scroll area is the next child, that's where we're at. This one is going to get a bit of a different class name as well. And that's going to be a with full we're going to add here, and also a call span full. And that's going to take up all the columns it can, unless we are on large devices. In that case, on large, we're going to say call span 1 and then hit save. That's already all the changes that we need to do. And let's see what happens here. And now we should be able to see, there we go. Now it's fully responsive, also looks great on mobile, and we can scroll up and down here on the side as well. And the user can actually click the checkout button right here on mobile as well. Beautiful. Okay, very, very nice. We've got the steps, they're responsive, this is responsive. The bottom part is responsive as well. Now, the next thing we're going to do is make this button actually work. What should happen when a user clicks this continue button? And well, what we want to do just conceptually, right, is let's go to excalidraw.com. Just conceptually, what's about to happen is when the user clicks this continue button, continue, that one, then we're gonna do basically two things. So thing number one, we're gonna fire off on that event is we're gonna save the cropped image, and let's put that under each other. There we go. We're gonna save the cropped image, right? The image, how the user has configured it, is very important. We need the cropped version of that to save in our database. That's what we have the cropped image URL for in our Prisma schema. You remember this one? That's exactly where this will come in. It's going to contain just the overlap of the image with the phone, how the user configured it, right? Just like this, for example. And then the second thing we're going to do is actually update our database as well with that cropped image URL, right? So we're first going to save the cropped image, get the URL from that, and then we're going to update our database accordingly with that new URL. So we always have the freshest data in our database. And that's basically the two events that should happen when you click this continue button. And we're going to start with the saving of the image, right? How can we save just the cropped area? That was actually one of the biggest challenges when I developed this app first. Like, how do you get just this cut out part of the image? And it turns out it's actually not that hard. There's a really cool way of doing this that works very, very good. And that is actually by creating something called a canvas. So in order to do that, the first thing that we need to keep track of are the coordinates and the dimension of this image. So we can crop it exactly how the user configured it when we save the image. So we're going to do that in state. We're going to create a new state in our design configurator, and we're going to call that state const and worry about the destructuring. Actually, let's destructure right now. We're going to call this the rendered dimension, and then by convention, the set rendered dimension. And this is going to be equal to useState, as I just said, which we don't need to import because we already have one up here. Great. And this useState is a function, and it will take an object. Now, the width of this image, we're going to keep track of that, as well as the height. And we need to pass these default values, right? By default, the width we already know. And that is going to be what's coming in here as the image dimensions, as props, right? We can already use those to initialize the default dimensions that are actually rendered for the image. And those are going to be the same ones as we do it in the React R&D further down here where we divide them by 4, right? Same thing. That's exactly what we're going to create the state with as well. So that's going to be for the width, the image dimensions dot width divided by 4. And then for the height, we're going to do something very similar, the image dimensions dot height divided by 4 as well. Very, very nice. That's going to be how we render out this image dimensionally. And now what about the position? This does not tell us anything about where the image is. It just tells us about how large the image is, right? And to actually get the position, we're going to say same thing, right? For state, we're going to destructure the const rendered position. And also, of course, again, set rendered position. And this is where we're going to keep track of the y and x values in this certain box that we have right here of where the image is located. And once we have that, then we know where the image is and we know how large the image is, and then we can calculate what part is overlapping with the phone. It sounds like magic, but it works really well. You're going to see that. So let's create the state. Const rendered position is going to be equal to use state. And by default, this is going to be an object that's created with an x value of 150 and a y value of 205. Now, again, these are not any specific values. These are the same ones we used in the React R&D. If you remember, same ones as here. They just kind of work. I just used them while developing this app, and you could totally change them if you want. There's nothing special about these numbers right here. Great, so now we have a place to store the dimensions and the position, but we're never actually setting them, if you notice, right? We're never actually updating these values. And the question is, where do we get them from? Where do we get the dimension and the position from? And the answer is from R&D. As easy as that. We can pass the R&D a function, or an event handler rather, and that's going to be the onResize stop. And this onResize stop, it takes a callback function just like that, in which we can execute any logic that we want. So let's already open this up. And if we maybe hover over this, we can see, yeah, it doesn't give us that much information, but we can get not the first item that's automatically passed into the function. There we go. We get the event, the direction, the element ref as the third one, the delta, and the position. Okay, that's a lot. Well, we basically don't care about the event, nor do we care about the direction, right? So we can simply ignore them. Let's do underscore and underscore underscore. And by the way, underscores are a convention of you're not gonna use this variable. We don't need it, so we're just gonna name it underscore. We do care about the ref as the third parameter received in this function. We don't care about the fourth, so we're gonna do 3 underscores for the fourth. And the last one is very important. We can directly destructure both the x and the y value that React R&D gives us whenever the user stopped resizing this element. And that's exactly what we're gonna set as the dimension and position, right? So for example, the set rendered dimension is simply going to be, let's call this the height that we're expecting for the dimension, is going to be parse int. So we are converting a string to an integer, and the string we're going to pass in here is going to be the ref dot style dot height dot slice, and then in the slice from 0 to -2. There we go. Because actually this is a string. Let me show you how this looks like. Normally this looks like this, 50px as a string. And we don't care about the px part. That's why we slice it away. We only care about the 50. But this is still going to be a string. And to have it as a number, we can use the parse int to convert that 50 into a number. As easy as that, right? And then same thing for the width. That's going to be parse int, and basically the same logic. The ref.style.width dot slice, we slice away the px part, 0, -2, and that's already it, right? We can get rid of the example, don't need that. And then lastly, for the position, you can see that's also provided by React R&D, and we can simply use that as they are. We can set the rendered position, position, and simply pass in the x and the y value, and that's already it. We get all the information we need from React R&D whenever the user stops their resize element. Now, what about dragging, right? This is for resizing, but if the user drags around stuff, the x and y right here, of course, also change, but this event is not triggered. We would not catch that event right now. And to catch that, we also get something called onDragStop. So whenever the user stops dragging. And in the callback function this takes, we don't care about the event, we only care about the data. Let's name it the second parameter that we accept in the callback function. And now we can simply destructure both the x and the y from this data, just like so. Great. And then we can set the rendered position to that x and y we can simply pass in as an object. Very, very nice. Okay, let's save that file. And now whenever we either resize this element or when we drag and drop it around, and that didn't handle the restart well, there we go. Whenever we resize it or drag and drop it around, these functions are going to be called respectively depending on the action, and update or state with the values that we now need to save the overlapping image whenever the user clicks the continue button, right? Let's do that. Let's finally get implemented, because I think that's going to be a really cool part of this saving process. So we're going to create a new function, call it async function save configuration. There we go. And this function, let's open it up. First thing we're going to do is create a try catch block, because we're going to handle some asynchronous logic. Let's catch the error, and then later on we can handle the error accordingly. So if anything goes wrong in the try block, we get to the catch block, and we can, I think we're gonna render out a toast notification to the user, telling them that, hey, something didn't work while trying to save, you know? Now, the question is, how do we handle the logic of the save configuration? And to kind of get an idea of how this works, right, we need to know two different things. First off, where on the page is this container? Right, this kind of grayed out container we need to know, because by default, the numbers we're gonna get are for the left of the page, right? The most left side of the page, not the actual container, right? And then we also need to know where is the phone case inside that container. So I think it's easier if I just make a little screenshot and then draw this out for you. So let's kind of copy this, paste it over here. There we go. So let's kind of get an idea. Let's give this a bit more space. Okay, so by default, all numbers we're gonna get are gonna be right here. Let's make this red. This part, this very left of the page, right? And that's not really what we care about. What we care about is not the very left of the page, but instead the container, where that one is, so the left side of the container, and also where the actual phone case is on the page, right? We need to know those two, not the most left one. And how we do that is by assigning refs to them. Because if we assign a simple ref to an element, a React ref, let's create one. Let's say const phone case ref is gonna be equal to useRef, and useRef is simply a hook that we can import from React, right? It's nothing special. And we can also pass this useRef a generic, and that's gonna be the type of element that we're going to assign it to. In our case, an HTML div element. So React knows, hey, later on, or rather TypeScript knows that later on this will be passed to a div element and point to a DOM node that is a div, right? And by default, let's create this ref as null and then assign it to our phone case right now. Where do we do that? We're gonna do that inside of the aspect ratio, because this is the container, right? That's the actual container for the phone case. That's the DOM node that we want to point to with our ref. So we're gonna say ref is equal to phone case ref. And similarly, so we get access to the container and always know the X and Y value of that container, this outer one that is with a gray background, right? We also need to know that one in order to calculate the phone case image overlap. We're gonna do the same thing. It's just gonna be called different. So let's create a new ref, and that's gonna be the container ref. And that's also gonna be a use ref for an HTML div element. That HTML div element that didn't work, and we're also gonna initialize it as null right here. And then we can simply assign this ref to our container. And the container in our case is gonna be the most top level div, kind of containing everything, right? This entire area right here that I just marked, that's where we want to assign the ref to. And in our DOM, that's exactly this element right here. That's the entire left area and not the customization, right? That's not what we care about, just this gray container. So the second div in our return statement, that's exactly where we are going to assign the container ref, just like so. And that is the foundation for us to calculate the phone case image overlap that we actually want to save in our database. So inside of our save configuration, inside the try block right here, in case anything goes wrong, let's destructure some stuff from our phone case ref. So const empty object is equal to phone case ref dot current, right? That's going to be the actual link to the DOM node. And then there's a function on here we can call, and that is the get bounding client rect, which stands for rectangle, by the way. Now, what does this do? Basically, it gives us the exact coordinates of our phone case ref. So the DOM node we assigned it to. That are the X and Y values that we care about. And they're named a bit differently here. In this case, they are called left. And by the way, we're going to get an error right now. Why is that? We can't just destructure these values. Why do we get an error? And that is because React is not sure that these actually exist. So what we can do, for example, is either say on the very top, and you don't need to follow along right now, I'm just showing this. If not phone case ref.current, we could just return, for example, right? And then we know that these exist at runtime, and we can simply destructure them right here. The ones we care about are the left, the top, the width, and the height, right? But I don't think that's ideal, right? Because if we just silently return, then the user won't actually know why their saving configuration didn't succeed, right? There's no success message. That's why we're just going to tell TypeScript, yes, we are sure that the phone case ref.current exists by using this exclamation point. And if anything goes wrong at runtime, right? If for any reason this should be undefined, then we can handle that in the catch block and show the toast notification, which is a much better way to let the user know, hey, something didn't work out here, right? And same effect, right? We can still destructure all the values that we care about in here. The first value we care about is left, and let's rename it to case left using this colon right here. That's how we can rename stuff that we destructure. And the reason we're going to rename this is because later on we're going to work with another left property that's going to be from our container ref. So it's just very clear what this left value belongs to. And by the way, if you're wondering what that is, it's the left offset to the edge of the page. So this edge of the page, it's the left offset in pixels that we have in our left right here. Same thing for the top. We're going to call it case top. And then we also care about the width and the height. And then very similar with the top, what is that from the very top of the page? That is the offset to the phone case ref in pixels. In px is the unit that we're working with. This is why these are all numbers. Great, and we can get the same information from the container ref. So the outer part of this entire thing, we basically need the same information to calculate the actual distance that is not from the very side of the page, but from inside the container. So we're going to destructure from the container ref.current and tell TypeScript, yes, we are sure this exists by using the exclamation point, get bounding client rect, and simply invoke that. And from here, we are going to destructure the left and call it very similar to the phone case, the container left. The top, we're going to destructure that and call it the container top. There we go. We don't need the width and the height. We simply need the left and the top, the same values we have for the phone case, to calculate the correct offset, not from the main left of the page, but just from the container that we care about. And the way we do that is we can simply say the const left offset is going to be equal to the case left minus the container left. As easy as that, right? And then same logic, the top offset for our image is going to be the case top minus the container top. There we go. And that's how we know exactly where the image is on the current screen, no matter how the user has sized their screen. Whatever they're viewing it on, these calculations right here will always be correct, because they take the actual values from the user browser, how this is rendered out, right? So if this was a very small window, then the phone is closer to the edges. That's of course in these calculations already, right? So they're still accurate. And now the const actual x, let's call it that, is gonna be equal to our rendered position dot x minus or left offset. And then the const actual y is gonna be equal to the rendered position dot y minus the top offset. Awesome, so let's quickly review the logic as to what each part means here. And oops, I didn't mean to do that. So let's kind of clear up the drawings here. Let's go into a bit more space on Excalidraw and then see what's happening here. So first thing, what is the width? The width is the actual part, and let's remove the image just for now so I can show you a bit cleaner as to what the hell is going on here. Let's kind of screenshot this out, paste it over here. There we go. And then let's review the logic in Excalidraw. So what is the width? Let's make this a lot larger. The width that we have right here comes from our phone case ref. And if you remember what the phone case ref is, it's the phone. So the width is going to be the actual width of our phone, how exactly it is rendered out in the user browser. So it's going to be exactly this part right here in pixels from here to the right edge of the phone. That's the width. The height, very similar, exactly the same thing, just the height of the actual phone case, how it's rendered on the user browser. And why we need this is to know how the image is being displayed and where the boundaries of that image are, because everything that's left, top, right, or bottom of the phone, of course, should not be part of the cropped image. And if we imagine this in kind of a canvas scenario, then the width and the height are going to be just the width and the height of the actual canvas, whereas the actual X and actual Y are the position of the image on that canvas. So for example, I believe the 0, 0 point is up here, or was it down here? Well, it doesn't really matter. Imagine up here, up left is 0, 0, right? Then if the image was, for example, right here, if this is the user image, then the coordinates are going to be maybe like 10, 10 or something, right? It's going to be very close to that 0, 0 point. If the image was down here, then that would be on the y-axis a lot more, but the x-axis would still be 0, right? So all we're doing is that these actual x and actual y values, they factor in the offset from the very left side of the page, and similarly how the container is rendered out. So these actually represent the coordinates of the image just on the phone canvas. They are relative to the phone. These coordinates are not relative to the left side of the container or the page, right? That's important. So this would be 0, 0 for the actual coordinates. Just imagining that top left is actually 0, 0. I'm unsure if it's top left or top bottom, or left bottom. I forgot that. But it also doesn't really matter because the same logic still applies either way. The actual X and actual Y, this would be 0, 0. And this would be like, for example, the maximum distance that would be possible from the 0 point. And using this, we know where the image is with the X and Y. And we also know how large the image is. Can I grab this? Can I scale this up? There we go. We know the position and we know how large it is. And that gives us all the information. And by the way, how do we know how large it is? Well, that is we're keeping track of that and say it, the rendered dimension, right? We're keeping track of how large the image is. And that gives us all the information to know where and how large the image is on the phone canvas and exactly know where we need to crop it off, right? So let's do that. We have all the information. So let's actually create the canvas to take to export this image, right? The way we're going to do that is, let's say const, and let's give this a lot more space. There we go. Let's say const canvas is going to be equal to document.create element, and we're going to create a canvas element. Now, the canvas.width, as I just told you, is going to be the exact dimensions of our phone, right? Because the phone should be the underlying canvas with these exact dimensions right here. Okay, maybe that's not totally accurate, but you get the idea, right? The phone dimensions are going to be the canvas size so that we can crop the image. So the canvas.width is going to be our width, and the canvas.height is going to be our height that we directly get from our phone case reference. Beautiful. And now we need something called a context. Let's say const ctx is going to be equal to canvas.getContext. And in here, we're going to say we need the 2D context. And if you've ever worked with a canvas, you know what this is. If you've never worked with a canvas, don't worry. Basically, what the context allows you to do is to modify the canvas and put stuff on the canvas, like draw an image on there, as we're gonna do. And to get the image that we want to draw on the canvas, well, it's gonna be the user image, right? And step 1 now is to draw the user image on our canvas. So in step 2, we can actually crop it. The way we get access to the user image, it's, let's say, const user image is gonna be equal to a new image, and simply invoke that class for now. Now, we need to set 2 properties on this user image for this to actually work. First off is user image.crossOrigin is gonna be equal to anonymous. Oh, and we don't get type safety here. Anonymous. There we go. And that is so we don't get any coarse errors in the next step. So the next step is gonna be user image.source is gonna be the image URL. And this, remember, we passed that in as a prop, which is the URL of where we host the user image. And so we don't get a coarse issue while we draw this image on our canvas, which by default sometimes happens if we don't have the permission to draw that image. We can totally avoid that by setting the cross origin to anonymous, so we can always render out the user image. And now we're simply going to await a new promise, and we get access to the resolve function in the promise. And what do we want to wait for until what happened? Well, until the user image.onload equals resolve, and not online, on load. There we go. So what this means is basically we are waiting until the image that we created here and set the source here has been successfully loaded from that URL that we passed into it here, which also means now that we waited for it to load, it's fully loaded and it's ready to be painted on our canvas. And the way we do that, that's exactly why we created this context. The way we draw on a canvas is by using this context, question mark, because technically I guess it could be null, right? This is just to make TypeScript happy. And we're gonna say .draw image. As easy as that. And this takes a lot of values, this draw image function. It's gonna take, first thing it takes is the user image, right? The image that we want to draw on here. Then where should the image be put on the canvas? Well, on our actual X and our actual Y that we already calculated. And then lastly, how large should the image be? Not just where is it, right? Not just, and let me mark this. Hey, can I mark this? There we go. Not just where is this image, in which corner or in the middle, bottom center, top center. We know where it is now, but how large should it be? Well, that is simply our rendered dimension.width and also our rendered dimension.height. So we are creating a canvas that is exactly as large as the rendered out phone from the user browser. We're putting the user image on there, on the actual X and actual Y coordinates, like the user configured it on their browser. So this complete image that we put on the canvas literally exactly matches how the user put their image on the phone in scale and in position. And that's important because that's going to be the basis for now exporting this image. How do we export that? Well, first off, we can't just export a canvas as is. That's an HTML element. We need to convert it first. And in order to do that, let's say const base64, which is the format we're going to convert this canvas to, is going to be equal to the canvas dot, and there's a really useful function that's exactly for exporting canvases as base64, and that is the toData URL function we can simply call on this canvas. That's going to give us back a really long string containing the image data of the canvas as base64 format, as a string, right? And we can say const base64 data is going to be equal to base64 dot split, and we're going to split this at comma and then at the index of 1. Why are we doing this? If you take a look at the format, we can log this out. Let me just show you. Let's log out the base64. I really want you to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Let's log that out. And just for now, let's also trigger the save configuration whenever we click the button, the continue button. Just for now, right? We're gonna change this later, but for now, we're gonna call the save configuration function. And when we now go back into our app, let's open up the console and let's see what happens, right? Let's go into the console, clear everything here, and let's click continue. oh, okay, you can see what happens. Wow, that's a long string, right? And you can see right up here, it says data image slash PNG base64, comma. This is the comma we will split at because we only care about the actual image data part. We don't need that first part right here, right? So that's just how base64 works. We have that thing at the start that specifies what this is. So the browser knows this is base64, but to save that image, we already know this is base64, and we don't care about that first part, only about the second part. That's why we can ignore the part at the index of 0, right? I think that makes sense. We can get rid of that console log again. And as I said, I really want you to understand why we're doing what we're doing, right? So now, in order to save this file, we can't just save it as a string either. What we need to do first is to convert it to an image. The way we do that is, let's say const blob, and that blob is going to be equal to a base64 to blob, which is going to be a function that we are going to create together. And it will take two things. It's going to take our base64 data, and it's also going to take the format in which we want to convert this. So in our case, we can say image slash PNG. So the way in which we specify this is that we expect this function to take in a base64 image and then output us an image slash PNG file. And converting base64 to a blob is actually pretty straightforward. Let's do it together. For example, let's define a function right down here, and let's say we're going to say function, and let's call it base64 to blob. And now let's open this function up. And of course, we already know what we should accept in the function, which is the base64. Let's call it base64 as a string. And then other than that, the mine type. And that's also going to be a string. So basically what we want to export this as, right? In our case, a PNG. Now, how do we convert a base64 string to an actual PNG? It's not that hard. The first step is converting the base64 string to the individual bytes. And we can do that by saying const byte characters. And this is going to be equal to atop, which is a built-in function. And we're going to pass in the base64 right here. And that function is going to be very mad that we use it, right? That's normal. It says, hey, this is deprecated. Don't use this. There are better ways to do it. And that's true. There might be different ways, but I always do it this way, also in all my new apps. And it just works very, very well. It does exactly what it should. And I've tried doing it some other ways and nothing worked as good as just using this function. So yes, it is deprecated. There's probably another way to do this, but this is just the shortest, most concise way, and it just works really well. So I don't care if it's deprecated. If it works, it works. So we're just going to use it. And then let's say const byte numbers. So we're going to convert this to numbers. It's going to be a new array, and we can give this array a certain length. That's what it takes right here. And that's going to be exactly the byte characters dot length. So it's going to be exactly as long as that string in bytes, right? So now what that allows us to do is to, for each array element in the byte numbers, to push the char code into that array. Sounds more complicated than it really is. We're going to do that inside of a for loop. And let's say for let I is equal to 0. So the iterator will start at 0 until the I is smaller than the byte characters dot length. And because that's 0 based, that's going to be exactly the right length. And lastly, we're going to say I plus plus. There we go. So we're going to go in 1 steps. Now, inside of this for loop, it's going to be one line. It's going to be very simple. All we want to do is to push the char codes of the byte characters into the corresponding array element in the byte numbers. So in order to do that, we can say the byte numbers at the index of the current iterator. So that will be like 0, 1, etc., until we reach the byte characters dot length is going to be equal to the byte characters dot char code add. That's what I meant with the char codes. And this takes an index. And if we take a look at what this char code add function even does, it says right here, if we hover over it, it returns the Unicode value of the character at the specified location. So in our case, all we need to pass in here is going to be the current iterator, right? And that's already it. We now populated our byte numbers array, which now means we can convert it to a uint8 array. So let's say const byte array is going to be equal to a new uint 8 array and pass in the byte numbers right here. Now, if we hover over this, we can see the type is a new uint 8 array, exactly what we have right here. Why are we doing this, right? That's very important to understand, so that we can now convert this to a blob element. And a blob, for example, takes the MIME type that we want to convert it to. So taking the original string and converting to a byte array gives us the full flexibility to now make the MIME type out of this array. The way in which we do this is to, let's say, return a new blob, and we can call this constructor with the byte array, and now the, I misspelled that, byte array. And now is the second thing we can pass in here, the type. It takes the endings and it also takes the type. We only care about the type, and that can simply be our MIME type. We can specify we want this byte array as an image/png. And that's it, right? That's all the logic to convert a base 64 string encoded image into an actual PNG that we can now use and store in our upload thing storage, right? So we have the blob element right here. That's exactly what we need. And now the last thing we need to do is to convert this to an actual file element, right? Nothing easier than that. We can say const file is equal to a new file. We can call it just like we did here with the byte array, the new blob, right? Where it takes an array and that's the byte array. This also takes an array and that's simply going to be our file, right? And then we can also specify the file name. Let's just say, for example, file name.png. It doesn't really matter what we put in here. And then the last thing are the options that this takes. So what we are going to pass in here is going to be the type, and that's going to be image/png, which just means that the file we created here is going to be of type image PNG. Oh, and of course, this doesn't take the file, but it takes the blob, right? So we are making a new image/png file called filename.png, which doesn't really matter because upload thing will automatically generate a file name for us. And as the basis for this file, the actual file content, we are using the blob that we just got from our base 64 string.